Hey everyone, welcome back to Paranormal M. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel, and if you have any strange or unexplained experiences of your own, you can send them to me anytime. Tonight, we're starting with a story from someone who feels like paranormal activity has followed them for most of their life. They had a lot of scary experiences as a child, and now they hear their name being called when no one is there. They even had someone else hear it at the same time. Let's get into the story, and I hope you all have a relaxing night and sleep well. Okay, so I should probably start by saying that I've been seeing things I can't explain since I was really young. I was never into horror movies or scary stories. Honestly, I avoided them because they frightened me too much. But apparently, that didn't matter, because strange figures and spirits still seem to find me. There are far too many experiences to explain one by one. I've seen shadowy people, human-looking apparitions, and things that felt much darker. Whatever they were, they all seemed to have one thing in common. They were aggressive. It never felt random either. It felt personal, almost like they knew I could see them. I've been chased through hallways. I felt something shove me from behind. Once, I saw a figure coming toward me while holding what looked like a long, rusty pin. I still have no idea what that was supposed to be. Other times, I would notice something walking past a doorway, and the moment I looked directly at it, it would suddenly turn around and rush toward me. Most of that happened before I turned 13. As I got older, the full apparitions became less frequent, so I thought maybe everything was finally calming down. Then I started hearing my name. It can happen anywhere. At home, in class, outside, and even once while I was working a weekend shift. It's usually spoken in this strange, breathy voice. Not quite a whisper, but not a normal voice either. For a while, I tried convincing myself that I was imagining it. I knew what I believed I had seen as a child, but hearing a voice was different. I wondered whether I was stressed, overtired, or simply mistaking some random sound for my name. Then someone else heard it too. One evening, I was talking with my mom in the living room. We finished our conversation, and I started walking toward the kitchen. After only a few steps, I heard my name spoken clearly behind me. The voice was airy and unfamiliar. I knew it didn't sound like my mom, but I went back to check anyway. I asked, "Did you just call me?" She stared at me for a second and said, "You heard that too?" That moment honestly stayed with me. She told me she had heard the voice, but she hadn't said anything because she thought I might not have noticed it, and she didn't want to frighten me. After that, it became much harder to dismiss. A few months later, some friends invited me to a paranormal investigation at an old community building. Normally, I would never agree to something like that because of everything I experienced growing up. But it was organized, there were guides there, and the group seemed relaxed, so I went. The entire night felt uncomfortable. Several of the devices kept reacting whenever I stood nearby. A radio scan box seemed to respond directly after I spoke. Even when I moved to a different part of the room, the activity appeared to follow me. Before that night, part of me assumed those investigations were staged. But when everything seemed to focus on me, I remember thinking, of course, if anyone here is going to attract something, it's going to be me. Sometimes these things even appear in my dreams. Those dreams feel different from ordinary nightmares. They're heavier, more vivid, and I wake up feeling as though I haven't been alone. I know how all of this sounds. I'm not trying to claim that I understand exactly what's happening, because I don't. I just know that these experiences have followed me for most of my life, and they've often felt frighteningly persistent. My mom has always been spiritual, so I grew up around sage, prayers, protective objects, and cleansing rituals. I've tried those things myself, but nothing seems to stop the experiences completely. My older sister also had strange encounters when she was young, but hers faded over time. Mine seemed to keep changing. That's the part that scares me most. Sometimes it genuinely feels like I'm on some kind of supernatural watch list, as ridiculous as that sounds. I understand that some people may be more intuitive or sensitive than others, but why does it always feel so aggressive? I'm not sharing this because I expect anyone to have a perfect explanation. I think I just needed to say it out loud and ask whether anyone else has experienced something this persistent. Because at this point, I don't think I'm overreacting. I just want to understand why it keeps happening. Hey there, I want to share some really strange, almost surreal experiences I've had. And I promise, every detail is true, as vivid as if they were happening right now. So, grab a cup of tea or coffee, get comfortable, and let me tell you these stories as if we're just chatting face to face. Alright, first off, this one happened early last year, around February. My partner had some work to do in Paris, and we figured, why not extend the trip a little? Spend a week exploring the city, soaking up the lights, the art, the whole vibe. One night, we were on the subway, and it was one of those packed Friday or Saturday nights, you know? The kind of crowd where people keep shuffling in and out, everyone just going about their business. And then, I noticed him. This guy stepped onto the train, tall as a tree, like at least 6'3" or 6'4". He was dressed in all black, business casual but sharp, neat. But what caught my eye was this huge scar running down his face, like something out of a thriller movie. Honestly, he looked like the villain you see in films. Now, I've never been one to believe in energies or vibes or whatever, but this man, he gave off something totally unnatural. It was like dread and fear and something else all wrapped into one heavy, suffocating feeling. I had to look away because honestly, it made me feel nauseous, like his presence was this weird, dark force pretending to be human. And get this, I could feel that he knew I saw through him. He stared right at me the whole time with this cold, empty gaze that sent chills down my spine. But the oddest part? No one else on that train even glanced his way. It was like he was invisible to them. After we got off, I couldn't shake the feeling. Every night on that trip, I had these violent nightmares. Nightmares so intense, they left me waking up gasping. Fast forward a few months, and I started noticing something even stranger. People around me, in completely different places, started giving me the same eerie stare. That blank, trance-like look the man on the train had. One moment sticks out. Black Friday shopping at the mall. There was this woman a few feet away, chatting on the phone, laughing, totally normal. Then, suddenly, her whole expression shifted. She looked at me with that same dead, scary stare. My friend, who's usually not shy about confrontation, just whispered, "What the heck is her deal?" The woman held that stare for a few seconds, and then just went back to her call like nothing happened. This kept happening, random people locking eyes with me and giving me this weird, unsettling look. And every time, I felt that wave of nausea hit me, followed by those intense nightmares again. It was like these encounters were connected, but I had no idea why. Have you ever felt something like that? Like someone or something around you just isn't quite human? Now, on to another story, this one from a couple of months ago. I was feeling off all day, like something bad was lurking just around the corner. You know that feeling? Like your gut is screaming at you, but you can't quite put your finger on why. I get those often, sometimes with dreams that feel like warnings. But this day, the feeling was so strong, I told my brother to be extra careful. He looked at me and said, "I know. I saw something weird last night." Apparently, after I went to bed, he was out with our dog, tinkering with a chainsaw, when he saw this huge red orb rise from the riverbed across from our place. It floated up into the clouds, casting this eerie glow. It spooked him so much he told the dog to get inside and stay safe, and the dog didn't come out until morning. Red orbs can mean different things, sometimes protection, sometimes anger or restless spirits. Given how uneasy my brother felt and how I was sensing danger too, I think it was a warning. Living in Oklahoma, we're no strangers to old, dark energies. Every time I leave the state and come back, I'm hit by this heavy, suffocating dread, like something ancient and malevolent is watching. I even talked to a Choctaw friend about it, and he said, "Why do you think we only settled here when we were forced? That place hates humans." I think he's right. I just hope my brother and I got the heads up we needed to keep whatever it is at bay. Switching gears, here's a more personal and touching one. Twice I was visited in dreams, and these weren't the usual fuzzy, forgettable kind, but clear, almost like sitting down and talking with a friend. The first visit was from someone who went to the same school as me. Even though we barely knew each other, the dream felt so real. They asked me for a favor, and I helped. We talked for a while, which was odd for me because I have crippling social anxiety and don't usually open up like that. But in the dream, it felt freeing, like a moment without fear. The second visit was even more special. It was my brother. Well, he would have been my older brother if I'd been born. Mom wanted 2 kids, and he would have been number 2, but she miscarried. I've always loved him, even though I never met him. In the dream, he looked a lot like my dad, but I could also see my mom, my sister, and me in his features. He had this hipster beard, like he'd be if he'd grown up today. I knew right away who he was. We talked about mom and dad, just mom, not my mom, you know? I was so happy to finally have him there, even if it was only for a little while. I'm the only one in my family who believes in the paranormal, so I kept it to myself at first. But it felt good. Even if Mom thought I was a little crazy, it seemed to bring her comfort. Have you ever been visited in a dream like that? It's such a strange, beautiful thing. Okay, next one takes a turn to something more eerie, but also tender. I have a really bad fear of spiders, like severe arachnophobia. One night last July, I saw a wolf spider in my room and just couldn't sleep there for a whole month. I camped out in the living room instead. One night, around midnight, I was having trouble falling asleep, scrolling on my phone in the living room. Suddenly, I heard a loud thump behind me, like someone ran into the bookshelf. I turned, and there, faintly glowing, was the outline of a short person. I'm a total scaredy cat, so I hid under my blanket, whispering, "Go away, go away, go away." I was shaking. The next day, I told my grandma, who's Christian but believes in spirits, what I saw. She wasn't overly shocked, but asked some questions. Then she suddenly ran back into the room, tears in her eyes, saying it was exactly 7 years ago that day her mom, my great-grandma, had passed away. I started crying too. I've felt spirits around my house since I was 3. Once, a spirit even trapped me in my room. It's a hazy memory, but it scared me then. I've also had intense déjà vu, sleep paralysis, and lucid dreams, though I usually cut those off because they scare me. For about a month after that night, I'd catch glimpses of my great-grandma's spirit around the house. I don't see her as much anymore, but sometimes I still feel eyes on me. If I ignore it or say, "Go away," usually it stops. Now, here's a story my Cherokee friend shared with me, and it's something that stuck with me deeply. Years ago, when he was a teenager, he had a terrifying encounter with a Wendigo, that legendary, monstrous creature from native stories. One night, his family's dog, normally calm, went aggressive the moment the back door opened. Then suddenly, the dog got scared and ran back inside. My friend grabbed his boots, a flashlight, and a big club he made, and ran outside. Out back, he felt this pure, evil presence. Then he saw a massive shadow, around 8 feet tall, humanoid, but with huge antlers. His flashlight didn't even light up the shadow. It was like the light disappeared into a void. The figure moved slowly, searching a workbench, then stopped and turned to face him. Its eyes glowed red. They stared at each other for what felt like forever. Fear was a death sentence, but somehow he lifted the club and pointed it at the figure. The creature nodded slowly, like it understood. His flashlight flickered off and back on, lighting up the whole yard. When he looked again, the creature was gone. What felt like lifetimes was really just a minute. Isn't that chilling? All right, here's another one about family and spirits. My Aunt Pam. She passed away about 6 years ago. After her funeral, her son sorted through her things stored in a unit and invited family to pick what they wanted. My cousins and I took some purple things, potion bottles, a china set, bedding. Purple was our thing with Aunt Pam. At home, I set up an altar-like space with the bottles and china on my vanity across from my reading nook. That night, as my sisters and I were in our rooms, my lamp flickered twice. When I looked up, I saw a dark silhouette of a woman, like she was underwater, hair floating around her. I couldn't see her face, but I could somehow see it in my mind. Her eyes glowing faint white, her hand reaching toward the bottles. She wasn't looking at me at first, and I held my breath. Then, she snapped her head toward me, my light went out, and I screamed. My sister Abby rushed in to turn the light on, trying to calm me. My other sister, Maddie, woke up and came too, rubbing her eyes, telling me to be quiet. We all froze when we heard a loud bang from the kitchen. Our parents had strict rules. No one was allowed in the kitchen after 6 p.m., and it was 10 p.m. Plus, the stairs and doors leading down to the kitchen were loud. We knew if anyone came down, we would hear it clearly. But the noise was real. Cabinets and drawers opening, pots clanging. Maddie, brave as ever, went to check. The kitchen was a mess, drawers wide open, pots still swinging. We sprinted upstairs, banging on our parents' door. They didn't believe us much, but showed us the kitchen camera footage. Nothing unusual. Still, I didn't sleep in my room for 3 months. Once, while sitting in the living room, I asked Maddie to grab my brush from my room. Suddenly, we heard piano music. My piano. I was terrified when Maddie told me it was unplugged and off. I still get goosebumps thinking about it. Finally, here's a softer, mysterious one. Something that happened just last night. I live alone with my 7-year-old son. He sleeps upstairs, I sleep downstairs. Our apartment complex is old, creaky, made up of buildings from different decades. I'm a light sleeper, so whenever he sneaks around at night, I wake up immediately. Last night, I was lying in bed, hearing his footsteps upstairs. I thought about whether he'd go back to sleep or if I'd need to get up. Then, I heard him come downstairs, creaking down the stairs. I opened one eye, just barely, to see who it was. I saw a child, smaller than my son, wearing a big puffy coat, standing at the bottom of the stairs. The child was reaching up, touching the bottom edge of a Tiffany-style lamp on the table. I wondered why he was wearing a coat inside and thought maybe he was about to turn on the lamp and ask me to walk him back upstairs. But when I opened my other eye fully, the child was gone. I got up and went upstairs. My son was still asleep. It didn't feel like waking from a dream. It felt like I was awake, listening, thinking. Then, suddenly saw someone. I wasn't scared, just surprised. The shape was clear, moving energetically. The stairway is lit by string lights I put up so my son wouldn't be scared at night, so it wasn't just shadows playing tricks. I looked it up today, but there's not much about seeing things with only one eye open. I just wanted to share. It's not the scariest thing, but it's been on my mind all day. So, those are my stories, strange encounters, whispers from beyond, and moments that blur the lines between worlds. Have you ever experienced anything like this? I'd love to hear your stories too. Hey there. I want to share with you a story that's been on my mind lately. Something truly chilling, yet deeply human. It's about a house in Union, Missouri, and the LaChance family, who moved in back in the spring of 2001. Stephen LaChance, a corporate trainer trying to heal from the loss of his wife, decided to start fresh with his kids in this big, spacious house. It had 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a wide front porch with a garden, and even a basement. Compared to their cramped old apartment, this was a dream come true. Now, picture this. The day they moved in, while Stephen was busy settling in, a sedan slowed down near their new home. Stephen noticed it immediately. The windows rolled down, and the passengers shouted out, "Hope you'll get along okay here." It felt odd, almost like a warning, but before Stephen could ask anything, the car sped off, disappearing down the street like it was trying to escape something. As the family unpacked, they began noticing strange things. There was a picture frame on the living room wall, an image of an angel, that kept falling down, no matter how many times they put it back up. Not just that one. Other objects seemed magnetically drawn to the floor. At night, Stephen's daughter would tell him about the closet door opening on its own and the unsettling sounds of boxes shuffling in the room next door. Imagine lying in bed, hearing those quiet, mysterious noises when the house should be completely still. Even the neighbors behaved oddly. Whenever Stephen or his kids approached, the neighbors would cross the street to avoid walking near the house. When Stephen tried to ask why, they clammed up, their eyes darting away. That silence was deafening, and it made the family feel isolated, surrounded by unspoken fears. One day, things escalated. Stephen's 10-year-old son went to the basement to grab the garden hose. The air down there felt thick and heavy, like the shadows themselves were watching him. Suddenly, he broke into a frantic run, clutching the hose, hearing loud, heavy footsteps pounding behind him. When he dared to glance back, he saw a huge black figure chasing him. No features, just a terrifying silhouette. He burst out of the basement screaming, heart pounding, and slammed the door shut behind him. Stephen found his son standing there, trembling, soaked in his own urine from fear. They searched the basement together, but found nothing unusual, just cold, empty darkness. That same evening, the boy had another terrifying encounter. As he stepped out of the bathroom, a massive figure sprinted down the stairs beside him. Its face was like a clown's, twisted, with no eyes, and it seemed to be coming straight for him. The boy screamed, running to Stephen's room, terrified for his life. Stephen checked again, but found no trace of the figure. He chalked it up to his son's imagination, warning his other kids to stop teasing him. But that night, Stephen himself faced the unexplainable. He was jolted awake by a deafening noise, heart hammering in the dark. Through his blurry vision, he saw an old man standing silently in the doorway, wearing a red flannel shirt. The man's face was emotionless, almost lifeless, staring straight at him. Stephen's face drained of color as fear crept in like ice. He rubbed his eyes, hoping it was a nightmare. But when he opened them again, the figure was gone. He told himself it was stress, but deep down, he knew something was terribly wrong. From that day forward, the house's paranormal activity intensified. Lights flickered on and off, sometimes turning on by themselves even when the family was away. Stephen and his father inspected the electrical circuits. Everything was perfectly normal. Yet, whenever anyone entered certain rooms, they felt strange electrical charges, like a sudden warmth that made their hair stand on end. Doors began opening and slamming shut on their own. The kids dreaded being alone, afraid to cross from one room to another without company. And there it was, the huge, dark figure, appearing and disappearing in doorways, its presence a constant source of dread. One afternoon, Stephen was in his closet when that dark presence pressed in on him, suffocating and intense. Turning around, he saw the faceless black figure staring right at him. The fear was overwhelming. Calmly, but with a pounding heart, Stephen gathered his kids and told them to stop what they were doing and follow him to the car. As they made their way out, the house erupted with loud, agonizing screams. Painful, torturous, deafening. They ran, heartbeats racing, and as Stephen glanced back, he saw the dark figure standing by an upstairs window, watching them flee. The next day, Stephen searched the house for any clue about the screams, but found nothing. Yet, those horrid screams returned a few days later, just as gut-wrenching as before. One night, Stephen was on the phone with his mother when the doors behind him began rattling violently. The rattling grew louder, turning into the same agonizing screams that haunted their nights. The whole house shook, and a foul, choking smell filled the air. Stephen hung up and dashed to his kids' room, only to find the door locked tight. He pounded on it desperately while feeling a sinister presence closing in behind him. Mixed with the screams of the house were the terrified screams of his children and a chilling, disembodied male voice. Praying with everything he had, Stephen finally saw the door swing open. He rushed inside, clutching his kids, relieved but shaken to the core. That was the last straw. The family packed up and moved out in July, leaving behind the screaming house and all its dark secrets. Years later, Stephen found out through a paranormal forum that a new family had moved into the house. Linda, her husband, teenage daughter, and grandson had taken up residence. Stephen reached out to warn them, but Linda already knew. She told him about hearing someone breathing right next to her when she was alone, unexplained footsteps echoing through the halls, and the same strange electrical phenomena. But the horrors didn't stop there. Police once showed up, responding to a suicide call from the house, though the family was sound asleep, utterly bewildered. Objects randomly caught fire, and the dolls in the house would mysteriously have their hair cut short. Most heartbreaking was finding their beloved cat dead in the hall, its back and neck broken like a fragile twig. Eventually, Linda and her family had enough and moved out too, leaving behind the haunted echoes of a house that seemed unwilling to let anyone stay in peace. It's a story that stays with you, the kind that makes you wonder, what lingers in the shadows when no one's looking? Hey there. I want to share with you a story that's both chilling and deeply personal, about a family who moved into what they thought would be their dream home, only to find themselves trapped in a nightmare they couldn't escape. It's a story about the Cranmer family and their house on Brownsville Road, Pennsylvania. So, sit back and let me take you through their harrowing journey. It all began in December of 1988. Bob Cranmer, a 32-year-old man who had just retired from military intelligence, purchased a beautiful mansion at 3406 Brownsville Road. The house was grand. 14 rooms, leaded glass windows, big white pillars, ornate woodwork, and a large yard. It was everything Bob and his wife Lisa, along with their 4 children, had ever dreamed of. They were excited, hopeful, and ready to start a new chapter. But from the very first day, strange things started to happen. Their eldest son, Bobby Jr., wandered off during the move-in. After searching frantically, Bob and Lisa found him crying, his mouth wide open but no sound coming out, eyes squeezed shut. It was Mrs. McHenry, the previous owner, who first reached him. She wrapped her arms around Bobby like she had been expecting this moment. Then she warned Bob and Lisa to keep a close eye on their children inside the house. The family tried to brush off her eerie words, thinking she was just emotionally attached to the home she was leaving. Bob described the first walk into the house as stepping into the belly of a massive ship, dark, heavy, and strange. The atmosphere was thick with unease, but the family tried their best to adapt. The kids quickly began acting oddly. Nighttime became a source of terror. They were too scared to be alone and often crawled into their parents' bed by morning. Bobby, especially, developed an aversion to his own bed and instead preferred to curl up in his closet. Despite their efforts, Bob and Lisa couldn't coax him to sleep anywhere else, so they placed a small mattress inside the closet for him. Wanting to bring peace to their home, Bob's mother suggested inviting a priest to bless the house. They called Father Victor, a trusted priest from Bob's hometown. The priest went through every room, blessing them all. But when he reached Bobby's bedroom, the infamous blue room, Bobby stood at the door, tears in his eyes, pleading for Father Victor not to enter. To avoid upsetting the boy, the priest blessed only the outside of the room and left. This seemed to mark the beginning of the house's deeper darkness. At first, the paranormal events were minor annoyances. Bob would find the pull-string light under the stairs tangled mysteriously, although none of the children were tall enough to reach it, and Lisa denied meddling. Lights flickered and turned on by themselves, especially in the basement. Bob's work chair would sometimes be pulled out to face the furnace, despite him leaving it neatly tucked in. The children reported hearing knocks and footsteps at night, but the parents chalked it up to their imaginations. Until the children began describing a dark, hooded figure stalking hallways and doorways. Then came the blue room's curse. When Lisa started sleeping in Bobby's room during renovations, she began to unravel mentally. Her breakdown was so severe that she was admitted to a psychiatric hospital for 2 weeks. The family believed darkness clung to this room like a suffocating fog, a catalyst that stirred tempers and unrest. Bobby himself was haunted by terrifying visions. He often saw a tall, grim, reaper-like figure lurking in the blue room, a presence so menacing he feared it would one day kill him. One night, alone and lying in bed, Bobby heard a haunting sound, like bagpipes playing from a distant, eerie place. The noise grew louder and louder until, suddenly, his door creaked open on its own. A static, faceless, childlike figure floated in, followed by the tall, hooded apparition who lunged toward him with an outstretched hand. Bobby pulled the blanket over his head, but it was ripped away violently. Above him, a glowing, faceless figure hovered. He screamed until his mother returned, and then, just as suddenly as they appeared, the apparitions vanished. By early 2004, the house was consumed by paranormal chaos. Dark figures became common sights, footsteps and knocks echoed endlessly, and the smell of burning sulfur permeated the air. The family was living in a constant state of dread. 2 priests, Ed Moran and Michael Salvagna, came to investigate. After hearing the story, Father Ed conducted a mass in the house. But the mass seemed to unleash even more chaos. Picture frames slid from walls. Furniture moved on its own. Taps turned on spontaneously. Clocks stopped. Appliances failed without explanation, and computers malfunctioned. One day, while Bobby and his girlfriend were in their room, a CD flew out of nowhere, shattering against the wall. It was as if the house itself was rebelling. Father Michael, not a formal exorcist but known for deliverance, came next. The entity had grown more aggressive, aiming to tear the family apart. Arguments broke out over the smallest things. Bob and Lisa came close to divorce multiple times, and both Bobby and another son, Charlie, attempted suicide in desperation. Nightmares plagued every family member, and horrifyingly, when they woke, they sometimes found deep scratches and bite marks on their bodies. After Father Michael's visits, strange puddles appeared on floors and walls. Liquid that looked like blood, sometimes found 9 feet up on stairway walls. Bob initially suspected one of the kids, but none of them were tall enough to reach those spots. The substance felt almost like amniotic fluid, as if the house itself were bleeding. In the midst of all this, Father Ron, another priest connected through Bob's political circles, joined the fight remotely. He brought in Connie Valenti, a Christian mystic and clairvoyant with the ability to see places remotely. Connie guided Bob over the phone, instructing him to cover mirrors in the house and walk through each room, sprinkling salt in every corner and doorway, commanding the evil to leave. Despite these efforts and ongoing masses, the haunting only worsened. Connie uncovered the dark history buried within the walls. Long ago, a doctor notorious for illegal and reckless abortions lived nearby. He had rented the Blue Room as a secret clinic where he performed botched procedures, storing remains and burning them in the basement furnace. This horrific past stained the house with suffering and death. Even further back, in the 18th century, a woman and her 3 children were brutally murdered by Native Americans to deter settlers. Their bodies were buried under the oak tree on the porch, where the Cranmers now lived. The mingling of these violent histories created a dark entity that fed on pain and misery. Adding to the curse, a jealous worker who had been spurned by the original owner's wife cursed the family and the home during construction, sealing its fate. Desperate for answers, Bob reached out to a paranormal team led by a man named Adam. During their investigation, Adam inexplicably developed claw marks on his forehead. Equipment malfunctioned, and they noted chilling temperature drops inside the house. They discovered a secret, L-shaped space filled with black coal dust, a palm-sized amber stone, a bird skeleton, some of Bob's old Lego toys, and a crumpled piece of paper covered in creepy drawings. The air there was thick with darkness, heavy and oppressive. This house on Brownsville Road was no ordinary haunted house. It was a battleground between light and shadow, a place where a family's love was tested against forces beyond comprehension. Yet through all the fear and turmoil, the Cranmers held on to each other, fighting not only for their sanity, but for their very souls. Thank you for listening to this story. Remember, sometimes the darkest places hold the strongest bonds, and sometimes courage isn't the absence of fear, but the will to keep going despite it. Hey there. I want to share a story with you that's both chilling and deeply personal. It's about a man named Lee Moore, whose life took a terrifying turn, and his journey through darkness and hope. Lee and his girlfriend Alyssa had been together since they were teenagers. They were the kind of couple that seemed inseparable, always supportive, always caring. Alyssa was especially kind-hearted, the kind of person who'd listen to your troubles at any hour. Lee dreamed of a future with her, working extra hours to save for their wedding, picturing a happy life ahead. But then, in early 2007, Alyssa met Cheryl. Cheryl presented herself as a witch, dabbling in mystical things that Lee knew nothing about. After that meeting, something changed in Alyssa. The gentle warmth that once defined her transformed into a shadowed, irritable presence. She began spending more time with Cheryl, and their relationship started to unravel. Lee couldn't shake the feeling that Cheryl's influence was more than just friendship. He sensed a strange tension, almost as if Cheryl had a secret agenda, possibly even romantic feelings toward Alyssa, pushing her away from him. Nightmares plagued Lee, frightening visions that gnawed at his peace. Even during the day, he felt eyes on him, an unseen watcher lurking just out of sight. When he tried to confide in Alyssa, she brushed him off cruelly, her warmth replaced by cold dismissal. One day, as Lee walked up the driveway to his home, he caught sight of something horrifying, a huge black mass hovering above the house. The sight twisted his stomach into knots, and he collapsed onto the cold pavement. Alyssa rushed to his side, helping him up, but the dark presence vanished before she could see it. Before Lee could explain, Cheryl appeared, staring at him with a sarcastic smirk, dismissing his fear with a cold, "It's nothing." From that moment, Lee felt an oppressive presence at home, as if another being shared the space with him. Yet Alyssa refused to believe his claims. Tensions grew. One day, when Lee was searching for his beloved high school baseball shirt, he asked Alyssa if she'd seen it. Her evasive answers only confirmed his suspicions. She was hiding something. The distance between them grew until Lee couldn't bear it anymore. He ended the relationship and moved back to St. Louis, trying to heal. 5 years later, Lee found love again, with Claire. Their connection was genuine, and they married, expecting their first child. Together, they bought an old, spacious house, hoping to start fresh. But on their very first night, strange sounds echoed through the bedroom, footsteps and shuffles where no one was. Gripping his pistol tightly, Lee checked the room, but found nothing. They chalked it up to the house settling, old floorboards creaking. Yet the disturbances escalated. One night, startled by a loud slam in the hallway, Lee rushed out with his gun. Everything seemed normal, until the coffee table before him lifted off the floor, as if an invisible force was hurling it down. His heart pounded, sweat pouring down his face. Claire came running, finding Lee frozen in terror. They both realized they weren't alone. Days later, Claire went to the shed to grab a shovel. The moment she stepped inside, darkness enveloped her, the air turning icy cold against the warm day outside. Panic surged as an unseen force pushed her violently from behind. Her screams pierced the air, and Lee rushed in, but found nothing out of place. Claire was shaken, unsettled to her core. Another night, while Claire soaked in the bathtub, she heard heavy footsteps approaching, slow, deliberate, closing in from the next room. Calling out for Lee yielded no answer. The footsteps stopped at the bathroom door, and then, right before her eyes, a black, demonic figure with glowing eyes appeared. It pressed her head underwater, threatening to drown her. She struggled fiercely and, just as suddenly, the apparition vanished. Terrified, they knew their house was haunted. But the truth was even darker. It wasn't just the house harboring evil, it was Lee himself. Seeking answers, they reached out to Lita, a local paranormal investigator with a reputation for fearlessness. As soon as Lita stepped inside, she declared she sensed something demonic lurking. During an EVP session, Lee asked, "Are you demonic?" Immediately, lights flickered violently, and Lee's eyes rolled back. A guttural, otherworldly growl escaped him as he collapsed, unconscious. When he awoke, he had no memory of what happened. Lita warned them of a demonic infestation and summoned 2 demonologists, Deal and Farah. After thorough investigation, they confirmed the presence and began a cleansing ritual. During the ritual, Lee struggled to breathe. A shadowy demon appeared, choking him. Deal laid hands on Lee, praying fervently. Slowly, the demon vanished, and Lee's breath returned. Deal revealed the shocking truth. The curse wasn't on the house, but on Lee himself. Alyssa and Cheryl had used Lee's missing baseball shirt as a conduit to bind a demon to him. After the cleansing, the house grew calm, and the couple prepared for their baby's arrival with renewed hope. But peace was fleeting. Days later, Lita returned, insisting the demon remained, and performed another ritual before silently leaving. That same night, Claire found Lee unconscious, bleeding from his nose and mouth. Rushing him to the hospital, she called Deal and Farah. Doctors diagnosed failing liver and kidneys, but found no medical cause, only the darkness growing inside him. Claire's heart broke as she faced the terrifying reality. The battle was far from over. This story reminds me how sometimes the shadows we fear aren't just around us, but within us. Lee's fight was a testament to resilience, love, and the unyielding human spirit facing the darkest of nights. Hey, thanks for sitting with me while I share this story. It might not be the most dramatic ghost story out there, but I promise you, it's my real experience. And if anyone else has been through something similar, please share. I'd love to hear about it. Alright, so here goes. Back when I was in high school, I decided to take a summer college course in upstate New York. I'm an art student, so the goal was to get a jump on some early credits before college really started. The dorms we stayed in were these old, kind of creaky houses with 3 floors each. I was assigned to the second floor, sharing a room with 2 other students and our RA. For some background, I'm trans, and they grouped all the trans students into one dorm for the summer. That's when I first noticed something off. At the end of our hallway, there was this small closet, and when I opened it, I saw a neat line of salt laid out along the floor inside. It was odd, but also kind of deliberate. My room was right next to that closet, and inside my room was a mirror. I've never been comfortable around mirrors, always felt uneasy about them. I've believed in ghosts for a long time, but never thought I'd actually encounter one. Later that day, we asked our RA about the salt. He told us the building was haunted. He said he'd been there a week before we arrived to prep the dorm, and every night he heard the closet door creaking open and footsteps walking down the hallway. So his solution was to sprinkle that line of salt inside the closet. But he didn't stop there. He'd also drawn these symbols on the backs of our name tags, the ones stuck to our doors. I think they were pagan protection symbols, though I'm no expert. They basically meant something like, "Leave this place," or "You don't belong here." We laughed it off at first. Kids in their first college experience, right? But that night, lying in my bottom bunk bed, I stared out into the darkness. Then I saw it. 2 bright red glowing circles hovering between the mirror on my wall and the window next to it. My heart jumped, and I felt a chill creep up my spine. I tried to tell myself it was just a reflection or some weird light from outside. But when morning came, I checked the window. There were only trees outside, no houses close enough for a light to shine through. There was a road nearby where you could hear cars, but it was too far away to explain those glowing eyes. That same day, one of my roommates mentioned the blinds moving by themselves. It was the middle of summer, nearly 90 degrees, and there was no breeze. Our fans were off too, yet the blinds shifted, like an unseen hand was brushing against them. Fast forward to Wednesday. Our whole class took a trip to a supposedly haunted theater for a guided tour. I thought it was incredible and recorded every room and every word the guide said. I've always been fascinated by this sort of thing, hoping maybe I'd catch something on camera. Though, spoiler, I didn't. That night, I was uploading all the videos into a Windows Movie Maker project. It took hours, and by 2:30 a.m., I was still at it. While I was working on the videos, I heard a sound that caught my attention. A hissing noise, like a bus pulling up and then releasing air brakes. It was a familiar hiss you'd hear from a vehicle stopping. At first, I shrugged it off since cars often passed by during the night. But then the sound came back, louder this time, and it didn't feel right. I couldn't figure out what else could make that kind of noise. Since the building was old, my mind jumped to a possible gas leak. I figured I should tell the RA just in case. My glasses were just out of reach on my desk, so I had to get out of bed to grab them. The moment my feet touched the floor, the hissing stopped abruptly. And then, I felt this strange pressure, like numbness, at the back of my legs. It was similar to when your foot falls asleep but without the pain, just a heavy, eerie sensation pressing down. I was terrified, so I hopped back into bed, trying to calm myself down until I could get the courage to wake my roommate. I crawled into bed with her, and almost immediately, the same pressure started on my lower back. I lay there, frozen and terrified, the weight pressing into me, making it hard to breathe. It felt like hours, but finally, around 4 a.m., the pressure lifted. I was able to slip back into my own bed and fall asleep, though I was still shaken. From then on, I was absolutely scared of being alone. It got so bad that my RA pulled me aside and told me to get over it, saying, "One day you'll be alone." Yeah, thanks for that, buddy. Really helpful when you're already struggling with abandonment issues. By the third week, it looked like I'd be rooming alone, so I begged the RAs to let me switch to room with one of the girls upstairs. They fought me on it, insisting that keeping boys and girls separate was important, and they wanted to respect our genders but still keep us separate from the cis boys. It was a weird, complicated situation, but eventually, they relented. Once I moved in with her, the haunting stopped. The girl I roomed with had been raised to respect spirits. She would always ask permission before entering a room and thank any spirits for sharing the space. I started doing this too, and the atmosphere felt so much calmer. It was peaceful in our room, and for the first time, I felt safe. So that's my only ghost experience. It wasn't flashy or terrifying in the classic sense, but it was real. It taught me a lot about fear, respect, and the unseen. Thanks for listening. Hey, I want to share some stories about my first encounters with ghosts, experiences that honestly turned out to be far more unsettling than I initially thought. So, settle in, and let me take you through these moments, step by step. The first experience wasn't exactly a sighting, more like a strange event that happened in the corner of our dining room. There's this old wooden cabinet there, kind of a family heirloom, you know? We keep glasses and little keepsakes inside it. Early one morning, we were packing for a holiday trip, bustling about, and for some reason, I opened that cabinet. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a glass just shot out at us. Now, here's the thing. It wasn't balanced on the edge or anything. Nothing was near the front that could have caused it to fall. It was like an invisible force pushed it right out. Then, just a couple of weeks later, we were having dinner and noticed our largest elephant figurine, one of those heavy, solid pieces, was teetering on the edge of the cabinet top, almost falling. It was about a foot away from the edge. We thought maybe someone jumped or bumped into the cabinet, but no one was near it. What really got us was when we lifted the elephant back up, you could see skid marks in the dust underneath it. Clear traces that something had dragged it there. It was chilling to realize it wasn't just a random accident. Now, on to the second and honestly the scariest sighting. It happened in the same house, with nothing really changed around. My parents were away on holiday, and my sister was asleep upstairs. It was just me downstairs, playing on my PC. I had 2 monitors set up, and as I glanced at my second screen, out of the corner of my eye, I saw this tall, dark figure. It moved slowly from the cabinet I told you about, all the way to the kitchen. I know, I was a bit of an idiot because I just said to my friend, "One sec," and then bolted to the kitchen to check. But of course, when I got there was nothing. No one. Just silence. A week later, I finally told my family about it. And get this, my sister said, "Yeah, I've seen it a couple of times." And my dad? He told us a story about how he was once sitting in the living room and saw the same figure walk right past him, as clear as day. He hadn't heard my description before, but his story matched perfectly. It was like this shadowy figure was a common visitor, and that realization, it was downright spooky. All right, now let me take you to another place, my ex-boyfriend's house. This wasn't just any house. It had a whole eerie history. It had been a hotel, a brothel, a store, and even a funeral home back in its older days. The house itself was stunning. If you looked past the dust and decay, you could still see beautiful architecture, grand wallpaper peeling in places, and those deep mahogany trims that wrapped around every room. They were carved with intricate designs, some even shaped like guardian figures watching over the rooms. Being there was never a casual thing. The air felt heavy, and every time you moved from room to room, you'd get this prickling sensation down the back of your neck, like you'd stumbled into something unseen, something ancient. You can get used to that feeling during the day. It almost becomes comforting in its own strange way, a reminder that not all things are visible. But night? Night was a whole different story. Sometimes, after the sun had dipped below the horizon, the house would shift. It felt charged with tension, thick and oppressive. The hair on your neck would stand on end, and the energy of whatever was there turned cold and chilling. It's the kind of vibe that sends goosebumps crawling up your arms and refuses to fade for a while. Even now, just bringing it up makes me shiver a bit. One particular night, I was over there dog-sitting since my ex's family was out of town. We were just hanging out, watching TV, trying to keep things light. Eventually, we decided to explore the upstairs back hall, kind of daring ourselves to see if we'd stir anything up. The house had been strangely quiet all day, almost too quiet. We joked maybe the spirits had gone on vacation themselves. But as we climbed the stairs, the atmosphere shifted. The upstairs was a whole other level of eerie. You'd hear noises that didn't make any sense, whispers, footsteps, things shifting in rooms that should have been empty. The air was thick with negative energy, and you'd catch glimpses of movement from the corner of your eye. But when you turned to look, nothing was there. To make it even creepier, the upstairs had no electricity anymore. Years ago, they'd lost power up there, so they ran extension cords from the living room to the bedrooms. Not the safest setup, but it was the only way. The upstairs was split into two parts. Right at the top of the stairs, you'd find 3 big bedrooms with massive solid wood doors, all crowned with the same ornate molding from downstairs. To the left of the stairs was another door, identical to the others, opening to a long hallway with several rooms and a bathroom. Each door still had faded room numbers, leftover reminders from the hotel days. As the sun set, our excitement grew. We wanted to stir up a little trouble, get our adrenaline pumping with some ghostly encounters. But as we reached the top and opened the door to that back hallway, everything changed instantly. The air turned thick and suffocating, like a wave of darkness washed over us. The feeling of terror was immediate and overwhelming. We both thought the same thing at once. No. We shut the door quickly, and just like that, the oppressive feeling lifted. The house seemed almost normal again, but we were cautious. Deciding to stay put, we settled in my ex's bedroom upstairs. As we lay there watching a movie, the lights flickered, a common thing because of those dodgy extension cords. But this time, the flicker brought back that horrible presence from the hallway, rushing over us like a cold gust. Then, right outside the door, we heard a loud crash followed by pounding footsteps, like a toddler running. They were just 5 or 6 quick steps, but thunderous in their volume, echoing down the hall. When the footsteps stopped, the air shifted back to normal, and we just sat there, catching our breath. Neither of us said a word for what felt like an eternity. Finally, we agreed it was time to leave. The dog would be fine overnight. But just as we opened the door to leave, we heard a crunch underfoot. Looking down, my ex realized he'd stepped on something sharp. It wasn't just broken glass. It was shattered Christmas ornaments. These were special decorations his mom carefully stored in locked containers, tucked away behind multiple closed doors, far from where we stood. It was impossible for those ornaments to have ended up there by accident. We didn't look back. We grabbed the dog and left that house behind for the night, the echoes of footsteps and the weight of that dark presence lingering in my mind long after we'd gone. So yeah, those were my first real ghost experiences. Moments when the unseen brushed against the edges of our world, reminding me that sometimes the past doesn't stay silent. And honestly, they're way scarier than I ever expected. Hey everyone. A few days ago, I shared a story about hearing something imitate my mother's voice inside our house. I mentioned that I've had other strange experiences too, including one I managed to record. A few people asked me to share more, so here's the incident that still makes my skin crawl whenever I think about it. This happened around 4 years ago when I was about 19. I was lying in bed late one evening, scrolling through my phone and completely minding my own business when I started hearing this faint, rhythmic tapping somewhere in my bedroom. At first, I barely noticed it. It had probably been going on for a minute or two before it became irritating enough for me to actually pay attention. My first thought was that it must be one of my hamsters drinking from the water bottle beside their enclosure. The sound was similar, but it kept going for so long that I finally looked over, wondering how one tiny animal could possibly be that thirsty. Both of them were curled up together, fast asleep. The instant I realized the sound wasn't coming from them, the tapping stopped. The room went completely quiet. Then, after a few seconds, it began again. Tap, tap, tap. Slowly at first, then faster, louder, always following the same steady rhythm. I sat up and started looking around, trying to work out where it was coming from. After listening carefully, I realized it seemed to be coming from my closet. And once again, the moment I understood where the sound was coming from, it stopped. There was another brief silence. Then it started again, quietly at first, before building into that same rapid tapping. I stared at the closet door. It was barely open, not even wide enough for my cat to squeeze a paw through. That ruled her out immediately. Then I remembered something hanging inside the closet. Months earlier, I'd worn a creepy priest costume for Halloween, and I had left a metal pendant hanging from a nail on the back wall. The tapping sounded exactly like that pendant striking the wall. But there was no breeze. Both windows were closed, the air conditioning was off, and nothing else in the room was moving. Just outside the closet, I also had 2 old medals hanging from another nail. They were perfectly still. That was when I started feeling genuinely afraid. Every explanation I came up with disappeared the second I checked it. It wasn't the hamsters. It wasn't the cat. It wasn't the wind. And somehow, each time I figured out what the sound couldn't be, the tapping would stop. Almost as though whatever was making it knew exactly what I was thinking. Then it would begin again. Slow. Soft. Patient. And gradually, it would grow faster and louder. I remember sitting there with chills running over my entire body, feeling as though something inside that closet could see me, even though I couldn't see it. I knew I needed to leave the room. My phone was still in my hand, so I opened the camera. The second the camera app appeared, the tapping stopped again. I waited. Right on cue, it returned. Tap. 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 Getting louder. Getting faster. I pressed record and started moving toward the bedroom door. Every part of me wanted to run, but I also knew nobody would believe me without evidence. So I stood there for a few extra seconds, holding my phone toward the closet and trying to capture the sound as clearly as possible. I wanted proof that I wasn't imagining it. More than anything, I wanted a reason to explain why I refused to sleep in that bedroom for the rest of the week. Hello again. This is another story from my childhood, and honestly, it may be the strangest thing I have ever experienced. More than 10 years have passed, but I still think about it all the time. Some memories fade around the edges. This one never has. When I was young, My grandparents owned a camper at a quiet campground in northern New Hampshire. It was a religious family campground with rows of trailers, little gravel paths, and thick woods surrounding the property. At the time, my dad was dating a woman he had met through church. She had 2 children, and her oldest daughter was close to my age. We connected almost immediately. Before long, we were inseparable, always wandering around the campground, playing games, sharing secrets, and finding ways to entertain ourselves. Eventually, our parents bought a camper of their own a few spaces away from my grandparents'. It sat near the final row of occupied trailers, right where the maintained campground ended and the abandoned section began. Beyond that point, the trees grew thick around old, unused campsites. That detail matters because the woods were directly in front of us on the day this happened. My stepsister and I had been inside our grandparents' camper, probably watching television and talking about whatever felt important to us at that age. After a while, we got hungry and decided to walk back to our parents' camper for snacks. We stepped outside and started down the path. As we walked, we were facing the tree line beside the abandoned part of the campground. We had only gone about 15 steps when something leaned out from behind one of the trees. Both of us stopped instantly. Without even looking at each other, we threw our arms out, almost as though we were trying to protect one another. Then, at practically the same moment, we both said, "You see that too, right?" And we both answered, "Yeah." What we were staring at looked humanoid, but it was far too tall to be a person. I would estimate it was somewhere between 8 and 9 feet tall. Its body was incredibly thin, with long, narrow arms and legs. Its head was large and rounded, and its eyes appeared completely black. Any other facial features were either extremely small or simply impossible to make out from where we stood. But its skin was what I remember most clearly. It was pale, almost white, but it also had a silvery, pearlescent quality. The surface seemed to shift as the light moved across it, as though several faint colors were flowing underneath the skin. I know that sounds difficult to picture, but it was beautiful and deeply unsettling at the same time. Then it raised one of its long arms and waved at us. The movement was strange. It seemed slow and graceful, yet somehow unnaturally quick. Every motion looked deliberate and perfectly controlled, but my eyes struggled to follow it. It was almost as though my brain could not process the way its body moved. We stood there, completely frozen. A few seconds later, it slipped back behind the tree in the same smooth motion. And then, it was gone. There was no sound, no flash of light, no strange aircraft above us. The air did not change, and nothing in the woods moved. It was as though the figure had never been there at all. My stepsister and I ran straight to our parents' camper. We were crying and talking over each other, desperately trying to explain what we had seen. They did not believe us. At first, they accused us of making it up. Then they called us liars and mocked the story. When we became too upset to calm down, they threatened to punish us physically unless we stopped talking about it. So we stopped. But neither of us ever changed our story. Years later, I continued bringing it up with my father. Eventually, he began to believe that something really had happened. I think part of that came from hearing more public discussions about UFOs and unexplained aerial phenomena. But I also think he realized that my stepsister and I had repeated the exact same account for more than a decade. There was no reason for us to maintain a lie that had brought us nothing but fear and ridicule. Not long after I gave birth to my first child, the memory returned with overwhelming intensity. I was only a few weeks into motherhood when I suddenly found myself thinking about that figure again. It felt as vivid as it had when I was standing on that gravel path as a child. That was when I began searching online for people who might have experienced something similar. Around the same time, I discovered that public hearings and discussions about UFOs and UAPs were becoming more common. Eventually, I came across a man named Darren Axton, who claimed to communicate with a non-human being from an extraterrestrial civilization. I approached the videos with a lot of skepticism. I was curious, but I was not convinced. Then I watched a recording of one of his group sessions. Someone in the audience asked what these beings supposedly looked like. He described them as extremely tall, thin humanoids with large heads and dark eyes. He said they resembled the beings commonly called greys, except their skin appeared luminous and almost white. My whole body went cold. It was almost exactly what my stepsister and I had seen. The only thing I felt he failed to capture was the color of the skin. It was not simply white or glowing. It was silver, pearl, and faintly iridescent all at once. The color seemed alive, shifting gently across the figure's body. I still do not know what we saw that day. I cannot prove that it was extraterrestrial, supernatural, or something else entirely. All I know is that two children saw the same towering figure, watched it wave, and carried the same memory into adulthood. And even now, whenever I picture that quiet tree line, I can still see it leaning out from behind the tree, looking directly at us. So this happened around the summer of 2017, not long after my family moved to a small town in western Massachusetts. It was our first summer in the new house, and one afternoon, I asked my older sister, Mara, if she wanted to walk into town with me. There was a convenience store about 10 minutes away, and we figured we would grab some snacks, get a couple of cold drinks, and head straight home. The walk there was completely normal. Nothing felt strange or unsettling. We bought way too much candy, a bag of chips, and 2 sodas, then started walking back. Near the center of town, there was this enormous old building that had been converted into offices and spaces for small businesses. Right beside it stood an abandoned house. And when I say abandoned, I mean obviously abandoned. The paint was peeling, the yard was overgrown, and the windows were so empty and exposed that you could see straight into the rooms. I had noticed the place before, but I had never been close enough to really look at it. As Mara and I approached the house, we suddenly heard a man's voice. Hey, you two, you girls over there." We both stopped. At first, I assumed someone was standing somewhere on the property, so we started looking around. We checked the yard, the doorway, and every window facing us. There was nobody there. Then the voice spoke again, and this time it sounded as though it was coming from directly inside the house, right behind one of the windows. "Yes, you! Come over here. Come inside. I need to show you something. It's important. I can see you." The voice sounded completely human. It sounded like an ordinary adult man, maybe a little desperate, but otherwise normal. That was what made it so frightening. We could see through those windows. There was nothing behind them. No person, no shadow, no movement. Just empty rooms. But whatever was speaking seemed to know exactly where we were. The moment we turned toward the house, its voice changed. It sounded excited, almost relieved, as though it had finally managed to get our attention. "Come inside," it kept saying. "I need to show you something." Mara and I looked at each other, and I remember saying, very quietly, "Run." Then we took off. I don't think either of us had ever run that fast before. We flew past the side of the house, still clutching our snacks and drinks like they were somehow essential to our survival. But as soon as we reached the other side of the building, the voice was there too. Only now, it did not sound human. It became deep and distorted, like several voices were pushing through the same throat. It screamed after us. "Get back here! Get inside this house! I will come out there and get you myself. I will find you." Mara and I were making these terrified, breathless noises as we ran. We genuinely believed that something we could not see was chasing us. We did not stop until we were nearly home, and somehow, neither of us dropped the snacks. What made the whole experience worse was something I discovered later. Months before that afternoon, during our first winter in town, my siblings and I had walked around that same abandoned house. I had convinced them to come with me because I thought the place looked haunted, and I recorded part of it on my phone. We did not hear anything unusual while we were there, but when I watched the video afterward, there was a strange growling scream in the background. It sounded low, harsh, and almost inhuman. I had forgotten about that recording until after the encounter with the voice. When I played it again, I realized the sound in the video had the exact same tone as the thing that screamed at us when we ran past the house. To this day, I still don't know what was inside that place. I only know that it could see us, and it really wanted us to come inside. Let me give you a little background, because I feel like everything might be connected somehow. My dad and his wife have been together since I was very young, and she has never really made me or my two sisters feel welcome. A while back, she even moved into a separate apartment, saying she needed space from the children in the family, including two who are biologically hers. She eventually gave up that apartment, but the tension never really disappeared. There have also been years of rumors and accusations about her being unfaithful to my dad. I want to be clear that I have never personally caught her doing anything, but her own daughter has told me about it. My mother also says she witnessed something when I was younger and showed my father a photograph. I have heard my dad and his wife arguing about their relationship before too. What bothers me most is that several members of her family supposedly know what has happened, yet they continue smiling at my father and pretending everything is perfectly normal. She also leaves town every so often and says she is visiting relatives. Sometimes she is gone for several days. I know that does not automatically mean she is doing anything wrong, but after hearing so many stories about broken trust, it is difficult not to wonder. My father has lived in the same house for more than 20 years. He pays the household bills himself, and until recently, none of us had ever experienced anything strange or paranormal there. Her grandmother's ashes have been kept in the living room for years, but nothing unusual happened when they were first brought into the house. The strange activity only seemed to begin a few months ago, around the time my sister moved back home. Since then, objects in the bedroom where my sister and I stay have started falling for no obvious reason. A small calendar fell from the dresser. Other lightweight items have shifted or dropped. One afternoon, while I was asleep during a visit home, my sister's purse suddenly hit the floor. There was a box fan running behind it, but the purse was positioned in a way that made it seem unlikely that the air alone could have pushed it over. Right after it fell, I heard a kitchen grater rattling inside its plastic container. That sound woke me up. I remember lying there, staring into the room and trying to convince myself that there had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe something was unbalanced. Maybe the fan caused a vibration. Maybe the dresser was uneven. But this was not the first time. I have personally seen objects fall or move on their own at least half a dozen times, and it only seems to happen in the room where my sister and I sleep. My dad has also told me something that makes the whole situation feel even more unsettling. On 2 separate occasions, he saw each of my young nephews wave toward the same empty corner of his bedroom, almost as though someone were standing there. I honestly do not know what to believe. Part of me wonders whether the ashes have anything to do with it. I even had the reckless thought of replacing them with flour just to see whether the activity stopped. but I would never want to disrespect someone's remains. I also do not want to provoke anything, especially when I do not even know whether anything paranormal is actually happening. I just feel frightened and protective of this house. My father bought it so his daughters would always have somewhere stacked to come home to. I do not want to feel watched, threatened, or pushed out of the one place that is supposed to feel safe. Maybe there is a logical explanation. Maybe the fan is stronger than I realize. Maybe the furniture is unstable or vibrations are traveling through the floor. But these things never happened before. Now they keep happening, over and over, in the same room. And every time something falls, I find myself wondering whether someone, or something, is trying to get our attention. I am genuinely scared, and I do not know what I am supposed to do next. I was stretched out on the couch, right on the edge of falling asleep, when something tapped my arm. Not brushed against it, not a muscle twitch. It was a firm little tap from something hard and physical. I opened my eyes, expecting to see my pregnant wife standing beside me, but there was nobody there. For a few seconds, I just stared at the empty room. Then I heard something faint coming from the kitchen. It was so quiet that I almost missed it. Had I already been asleep, I never would have heard it at all. "Babe?" I called. No answer. I checked my phone. It was just after midnight, which didn't make sense because the last time I'd looked, it was barely 10. I must have passed out. There was a message from my wife glowing beneath the clock. "Staying at Rachel's tonight. Love you." Rachel was her sister, so there was nothing unusual about that. Still, the house suddenly felt different. Too still. When the furnace kicked on, I nearly jumped out of my skin. The rush of warm air moved through the room, but instead of comforting me, it felt like something had entered the house. I tried to laugh it off. I told myself I was exhausted. We had a baby coming, work had been stressful, and I probably hadn't slept properly in weeks. Then I heard something upstairs. A long, slow, scraping sound. It reminded me of a heavy dresser being dragged across the floor. I couldn't tell whether it was coming from our bedroom or the nursery. "Babe?" I shouted again, louder this time. A door creaked open upstairs. Then I heard the small decorative chimes hanging from the nursery door softly clatter together. That was when I stood up. "Who's up there?" I started toward the stairs, trying to sound braver than I felt. When I reached the top step, I saw a shadow at the far end of the hallway. It was small, about the size of a young boy. I raised my phone and turned on the flashlight. The figure froze. Then the beam of light seemed to take a breath. It dimmed, vanished, and came back. The only way I can describe it is that it felt like someone had placed a hand over the back of my phone, smothering the light with their palm. It happened between one breath and the next, so quickly that my mind couldn't make sense of it. At that point, I still believed there was a person in the house. Maybe someone had broken in. Maybe somebody was playing some kind of sick joke. The idea that it could be something else didn't even cross my mind. Not yet. When the flashlight steadied, the beam landed on the upstairs closet door. That was where the small figure had been standing. I charged up the remaining steps, stomping hard enough to shake the railing. Each footfall echoed through the house like something heavy dropping onto the wooden floor. At the top, I slapped the hallway light switch. Nothing happened. I swept my phone from one end of the hallway to the other, lighting up each doorway. There was no one there. I pressed my back against the wall and slowly moved toward the nursery. "I've got a weapon," I called out. I didn't, but whoever might have been hiding didn't need to know that. The nursery door was halfway open. We always kept it closed. Our daughter, Jessie, wasn't due until late spring. This happened in the middle of January, while the room was still mostly empty except for a crib, a rocking chair, and a few unopened boxes. As I stared into the darkness, I became certain that something inside the room was staring back at me. The feeling was so intense that my skin began to sting and itch. It felt like tiny cuts were opening across my neck and shoulders, then sealing themselves again. Without realizing it, I scratched the back of my neck until my fingernails came away with little traces of blood beneath them. I quickly unlocked my phone and called my wife. The moment I lifted it to my ear, the phone died. The flashlight went out with it. The darkness that surrounded me wasn't normal darkness. It felt thick and freezing, as though the air itself had turned solid. I tried to breathe, but I started gagging, then choking. It felt like I was inhaling water, like I had somehow become trapped beneath a heavy sheet of ice. And then something stepped in front of me. I still don't know what it was. All I could see was a black silhouette, darker than the hallway around it. It filled the space in front of me, as though it had clogged the darkness with the outline of a human body. For one long second, neither of us moved. Then every light in the house came on. I've had one encounter in my life that I still can't explain. I live in Skopje with my parents and my younger brother, and every Orthodox Easter, we visit my father's family village in the mountains. It's a beautiful place, but incredibly isolated. Thick forest surrounds it on every side, and only a few dozen people live there permanently. Most of the residents stay close to the church and the little village square. Our family house is different. It sits at the far eastern edge of the village, where the road narrows and the occupied homes disappear. There are no streetlights out there. Once you leave the square, the darkness feels complete. We had already been in the village for nearly a week. During Easter, hundreds of relatives and former residents return, so the place becomes crowded and lively. But by the following evening, almost everyone had left. The village was quiet again. It was close to 10:30 at night, and my family was getting ready to drive home. Because our house sits below a steep, uneven road, my father had parked the car farther uphill. My mother asked my brother and me to carry the first load of bags up to it. I used the flashlight on my phone while we followed the dirt path. Beyond that small circle of light, I couldn't see anything. We placed the bags in the trunk and started walking back toward the house. That was when my brother suddenly froze. Then he rushed ahead, turned around, and moved behind me. I asked him what was wrong, but before he answered, I saw someone coming toward us. An elderly man was walking out of the darkest section of the eastern road. That alone felt strange, because nobody lived in that direction. There were only empty holiday houses and forest. The man's clothes made the moment even more unsettling. He wore a faded mustard-colored sweater over a white shirt and a dark tie. His trousers were high-waisted and old-fashioned. He looked as though he had stepped out of a photograph taken decades ago. I didn't know what else to do, so I said, "Good evening, sir." He didn't answer. He didn't look at me or my brother. He simply walked past us at the same slow pace and continued down the road until the darkness swallowed him. My brother and I hurried back to the house and told our parents what had happened. My father said it was probably one of the older villagers taking a walk. Some of them did that during warmer months, although usually much earlier in the evening. His explanation didn't make me feel any better. A few minutes later, we all carried the remaining bags uphill. We loaded the car, climbed inside, and prepared to leave. As my father reversed, the headlights swept across the road. The old man was standing there. He was completely still, facing the car. This time, he was looking directly into the headlights. And he was smiling. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was too wide and too fixed, as though he had been waiting for us to notice him. Then he slowly raised one hand and began to wave. My father waved back automatically. The man never stopped smiling. As we drove away, I asked my father who he was. My father glanced at me through the mirror and said, "I have no idea. I've never seen him before." That answer sent a chill through me. This was a village where everyone knew everyone. There were barely 30 permanent residents, and my father had spent much of his childhood there. When we returned later that month, I asked my grandparents about the man. I described his face, his clothes, and the direction he had come from. Neither of them recognized him. My grandmother seemed especially confused. She said no one should have been staying in the eastern houses at that time of year. The Easter visitors had already gone, and the few holiday homes beyond ours were locked and empty. I also asked several villagers, including my grandmother's sister, who had lived there her entire life. No one knew who he was. No one had seen him arrive. And no one could explain why an elderly man dressed in clothes from another era would be wandering alone through that part of the village in total darkness. I still visit the village regularly. I've walked along that eastern road in daylight and at night. I've passed every abandoned house and looked down every narrow path. But I have never seen that man again. Sometimes I wonder whether he was simply a stranger passing through. But then I remember his smile and the way he stood in the darkness, waiting for our headlights to find him. Hey, I've been trying to figure out what exactly I encountered, because I've only ever found one other person online describing something even remotely similar. Their experience happened somewhere in the South, while mine took place in the Pacific Northwest, so I have no idea whether the two could be connected. This happened about 5 years ago, back when I was still very religious, which becomes important later. My family had moved onto a property where my grandmother had built a house. We stayed in the basement apartment beneath her living space, and almost immediately, something about that basement felt wrong. I was a teenager at the time, and during the summer I was often left home alone with our dog. I'd finish my chores, sit down on the couch, and try to relax. Then the hallway would suddenly seem much darker than it should have been. The doors along the hallway would begin opening one after another, almost in a zigzag pattern. Whenever that happened, I'd be hit with this overwhelming sense of danger. It felt as though something was rushing toward me, even though I couldn't see anything. I would run upstairs into my grandmother's part of the house, and the fear would stop the instant I crossed through her doorway. She had blessed and anointed that entrance, and somehow the feeling never followed me beyond it. Sometimes the dog would bark toward the hallway. Other times, he wouldn't make a sound. He would simply race upstairs beside me as though he felt the same need to escape. Over time, the activity became harder to dismiss. Once, while I was washing dishes, a kitchen drawer slammed shut beside me. Another time, I had placed a bowl of snacks on top of a bookshelf that was nearly 8 feet tall. I put it there so my younger siblings wouldn't find it. Without warning, the bowl was struck with enough force to send it flying across the room. That was the only incident my entire family witnessed. Everyone froze and stared at one another. Nobody had an explanation. They just kept saying how strange it was. There was another night when I felt something pressed down near the foot of my bed. I assumed it was our cat settling onto the blanket, but when I looked, nothing was there. Around that same period, I began seeing a figure outside near the trees. It looked like a tall, muscular man, except its head resembled a jackal or a Doberman. Its entire body appeared gray, almost drained of color. I once watched it move through the wooded part of the yard on both its hands and feet. It was fast, but its movements were disturbingly controlled. The clearest encounter happened late one night. I shared a bedroom with my little sister, who was around 6 years old. We were settling down to sleep when I noticed that the corner near the bathroom had become unnaturally dark. I immediately felt watched. I picked up a flashlight and pointed it toward the corner. Standing there was the same muscular figure with the long, jackal-like head. Its eyes reflected the beam exactly like an animal's eyes would. It wasn't simply looking in my direction. It seemed to be studying both me and my sister. The way it watched us made me feel certain that it intended to hurt one of us. Then it moved toward the bathroom. The figure was too tall to pass normally beneath the doorway, so it bent its head sideways at a sharp angle, almost 90 degrees, and slipped beneath the frame. Every few moments, its head would appear from behind the doorway to check whether I was still watching. At the time, my faith was incredibly important to me. I began praying aloud, asking God to protect us and to send angels into the room. I prayed continuously for what felt like half an hour. The entire time, I could still sense that presence nearby. Then, very suddenly, the pressure lifted. The room felt normal again, and for the first time that night, I believed we were safe. I never saw the figure again after that. I still don't know what it was. I've searched through stories about spirits, shadow figures, cryptids, and animal-headed entities, but nothing I've found matches it completely. So I'm sharing this in the hope that someone else may recognize it. Has anyone ever heard of a tall, gray, jackal-headed figure that moves on both 2 legs and 4? I've never expected anyone to believe this story. Honestly, I'm still not sure what I believe myself. I'm not telling you this to prove that ghosts, creatures, or anything supernatural exists. I just want to tell you what happened as clearly as I can, because even after all this time, I haven't found an explanation that makes sense. This happened in the winter of 2023 on a wooded mountain in western Washington. At the time, I was living alone in a small trailer with my dog, Luna. The property was remote, surrounded by thick forest, steep hills, and streams fed by mountain springs. It could be lonely, but I loved it there. The mountain had become my home. One afternoon, I was clearing a path through the woods toward a place where I hoped to build a workshop. A narrow stream ran through that part of the property, and I had the idea of redirecting some of the water into a low area to create a small pond. While digging, I noticed a dark opening near the roots of an old cedar stump. It was about 2 feet wide, maybe a little more. When I leaned closer, I could see that it didn't end beneath the roots. It continued sideways into the hillside, almost like a tunnel. I remember thinking, that looks like a little cave. But I didn't give it much attention. I kept working and dug a shallow channel to guide the stream toward the depression nearby. The moment the water reached it, the ground collapsed. It happened so quickly that I stumbled backward. Water rushed into the opening and disappeared underground. A gust of stale, earthy air came pouring out, followed by a cloud of tiny insects. That was when I realized the space beneath me was much larger than I had imagined. I stood there for a while, staring down into the darkness. Nothing moved. I didn't hear an animal or see a pair of eyes looking back at me. Still, something about that opening made me deeply uncomfortable. It wasn't ordinary fear. It felt more like a warning that arrived before the reason for it. So I started covering the hole. I dragged over fallen branches, rolled stones into it, and packed dirt around the edges until the water stopped pouring underground. By the time I finished, the afternoon light was beginning to fade. Before heading home, I decided to walk upstream to a place I called the Quiet Pool. It was my favorite place on the property. The creek passed over several small waterfalls there, and I had arranged stones to create a natural pool. Whenever life felt heavy, I went there to sit beside the water and clear my head. I crouched beside the creek and rinsed the mud from my hands. As I stood up, I caught a flash of movement uphill. Something dark slipped between two trees. At first, I dismissed it. In the forest, your peripheral vision plays tricks on you all the time. It could have been a bird, a shadow, or an animal passing through the brush. Then I looked straight ahead. There were figures standing among the trees. I don't know how else to describe them. They looked human in shape, but they weren't solid. They were almost transparent, as though the air around them had been folded or distorted. The forest was visible through them, but the trees behind their bodies seemed to shimmer and bend. The closest comparison I can give you is the cloaking effect from the Predator films. Except I wasn't watching a screen. I was standing alone in the woods, and there seemed to be several of them scattered around me. The strange thing is, this wasn't the first time I had seen something like that. The winter before, I had noticed a similar figure near an old cabin lower on the mountain. Around the same time, I had also seen a pale green light moving between the trees on several different nights. Those earlier encounters hadn't frightened me. They had felt peaceful, almost curious. This felt completely different. None of the figures came toward me. They didn't threaten me or make a sound, but every instinct in my body was telling me to leave. Then Luna suddenly froze beside me. Her ears lifted. Her tail became rigid. A second later, she bolted into the forest, racing back in the direction of the hole I had uncovered. My first thought was that she had caught the scent of a cougar or a bear. That was the sensible explanation. I called after her and stood watching the trees, waiting for something to emerge. Nothing did. Luna eventually returned, but the atmosphere around the creek had changed. The place that had always made me feel safe suddenly felt unfamiliar. I didn't feel welcome there anymore. So we went home. As I walked back toward the trailer, I kept trying to reason with myself. Maybe the light had been strange. Maybe exhaustion had affected my vision. Maybe mist from the creek had created an illusion between the trees. I wanted an ordinary explanation. By the time I reached the trailer, I still didn't have one. That evening, I tried to continue as usual. I fed Luna, warmed something to eat, and sat on the couch. But the uneasy feeling from the creek had followed me home. Later, I opened the small window behind the couch and sat beside it for some air. Most of the other windows had been covered for winter, so that narrow opening was my only clear view of the woods. That was when I heard the first branch snap. It came from the trees just to the right of the trailer. This wasn't the sound of a twig breaking. It was a heavy crack, the kind made by a thick, living branch. I stopped moving and listened. The woods went silent. A few minutes later, another branch broke. Then another. The sounds continued throughout the evening. Sometimes several branches would snap within only a few minutes. What bothered me most was that the noises seemed to come from different places within a small circle around the trailer, and slowly, they seemed to be getting closer. I told myself it was deer moving through the timber. Maybe snow or moisture was weighing down the branches. Maybe I was simply connecting random sounds because of what I had seen earlier. Then something tapped against the outside wall. It sounded metallic, almost like someone lightly striking the trailer with a small tool. Tap. Tap. Then silence. A few minutes later, it happened again. The tapping and the breaking branches continued for hours. I had no electricity that night. The trailer was completely dark, and none of my flashlights seemed to be working properly. I tried using my phone to record the sounds, but the screen kept freezing. Then the phone shut itself off. At the time, I was mostly frustrated. I didn't immediately assume the phone trouble was connected to anything outside. Even now, I can't say that it was. All I know is that when I needed it, it stopped working. I stared through that one open window, hoping to see a deer, a bear, or even a falling limb. Anything would have been better than not knowing. But I never saw what was making the sounds. The branches continued to break. The tapping continued. And morning eventually arrived. Daylight brought an enormous sense of relief. Everything outside looked normal again. The trees were still standing. The creek was running. There were no obvious tracks around the trailer. In the morning sun, the entire night almost felt foolish. That's one of the strange things about fear. Darkness can make an experience feel undeniable, while daylight immediately begins negotiating with your memory. Still, I decided to inspect the area. Near the place where I had heard the first loud crack, I found several broken evergreen branches. They were about as thick as 2 fingers and still covered in green needles. They weren't old or rotten. Some were still partially attached to the tree. When I stood beneath them and looked back, I could see directly into the window where I had been sitting. Then I noticed the tree beside them. The patterns in its bark formed what looked like the face of an angry man. There appeared to be a deep brow, narrow eyes, and a mark above one eye that resembled a scar. I know what pareidolia is. I understand that the human mind searches for faces in random shapes, but this looked unusually precise, and it was facing directly toward my window. I took several photographs and went back inside. Later, I sketched a symmetrical face on my computer and placed it over the image of the tree. The features aligned far more closely than I expected. Maybe it meant nothing. I'm not telling you it was a real face. I'm only telling you that, after the night I had experienced, seeing it there didn't help me feel any safer. Over the next few days, the mountain felt different. Every movement among the trees made me turn my head. Every unfamiliar sound stopped me in my tracks. Most of the time, there was nothing there. But the feeling of being watched never fully disappeared. Eventually, I stopped going outside. I remained inside the trailer for nearly 3 weeks. I searched online for descriptions of translucent figures in forests, trying every phrase I could think of. Eventually, I found accounts from other people who described almost exactly what I had seen. Many compared the figures to distorted glass or a heat shimmer shaped like a person. Some called them glimmer men. That search led me into stories involving wilderness disappearances, cave systems, and strange encounters in national forests. I didn't know which stories were true. I still don't. But I couldn't ignore the similarities. I was living alone on a heavily wooded mountain near protected forest land, and everything had begun on the same afternoon that I uncovered a hidden tunnel beneath the property. Because I was too afraid to leave the trailer, even collecting water became difficult. At one point, I tied cord around a metal cup, lowered it through the window, filled it with clean snow, and pulled it back inside for Luna and me. I realize that sounds extreme, but fear becomes very practical when you're alone. You stop thinking about whether you look foolish. You simply find a way to get through the next hour. When I finally stepped outside again, I found something that still troubles me. A thin, circular line had been scratched into the ground all the way around the trailer. The line continued beneath my parked truck instead of curving around it. There were no footprints beside it, no tire marks, no animal tracks, just the circle. From that point forward, I began documenting everything. I wrote down dates, saved photographs, and recorded every unusual detail I could remember. The intense activity eventually faded, but smaller things continued. One afternoon, I returned to the quiet pool. Near the creek, I found a branch standing upright in the soil. It was shaped like a tiny tree and had been pushed deeply into the rocky ground. I had recently started planting a garden around the property, and my first impression was strangely innocent. It looked as though someone, or something, had watched me planting and had tried to imitate it. I know how that sounds. I'm not saying that's what happened. It was simply the feeling I had when I saw it. Before accepting anything unusual, I looked for a normal explanation. I checked the branches overhead to see whether it could have fallen into that position. There was nothing directly above it. When I pulled it from the ground, it took far more force than I expected. The soil was wet, dense, and full of stones. It didn't seem possible that the branch had simply fallen and buried itself upright. After examining it, I placed it back exactly where I had found it. Over the following weeks, other small branches appeared in my garden beds. A branch lying in a garden is not proof of anything. I understand that. But these pieces often appeared in places where they didn't seem to belong. Each time, I tried to find the simplest explanation. Wind, animals, falling limbs, my own forgetfulness. I wanted one of those explanations to satisfy me. None of them did. Even today, I can't tell you what those figures were. I can't prove the sounds around my trailer were connected to the cave. I can't prove the circle, the tree, or the planted branches meant anything at all. Maybe each event had its own ordinary explanation. Maybe my mind connected them because I was isolated and frightened. That is possible. But I also know what it felt like to stand among those trees and watch the forest bend around human-shaped forms. I know what it felt like when a place I loved suddenly seemed to reject my presence. And I know that everything changed after the ground opened beneath that stream. I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm only telling you what happened. And somewhere beneath that mountain, the tunnel is probably still there. Honestly, the fact that you're even willing to open your mind and put real effort into having a genuine experience is already a strong first step. But I'll say this right away, and I mean it kindly. Stay grounded. Wanting an experience is fine, but don't walk into it wanting to believe every little sound is something supernatural. Do your due diligence. Try to debunk things. Check for drafts, old pipes, animals, loose boards, anything ordinary first. That way, if something does happen, you won't be left wondering whether you fooled yourself. If you're just starting out, I really think the best thing you can do is go with someone you trust. Maybe a close friend, a sibling, someone steady. That way, you can talk things through together, compare what each of you felt or heard, and keep each other balanced. I'd also suggest looking for local places near you that host public paranormal investigations. A lot of these are led by people who know the building's history well, and they usually know the active spots too. It's also much cheaper than trying to rent out a whole location by yourself. There are websites with maps and lists of haunted places in different areas. Some are official tours or public investigations, and others are just local legends where people have reported strange activity. The one thing I would not do is jump straight into some ritual or seance. That is not where you start. You don't know exactly what you're doing yet, and more importantly, you may not know how to protect yourself. I've been investigating the paranormal for around 12 years, and even now, I wouldn't sit down and do a seance alone. And that's with experience. When you go into a place, clear your mind and focus on your intentions. In your case, it sounds like your intention is to communicate or possibly have some kind of experience because you have real questions about what happens after death. To me, that's a sincere reason. You're not just barging in demanding proof. You're coming in with curiosity, respect, and a genuine question. And I'll tell you now, if you do get a response, it probably won't answer everything. It'll likely make you ask even more questions. That's just how this field works. I don't think anyone can know everything about the paranormal, part of me even believes we're not meant to know all of it. Also, don't be discouraged if you spend 6 or 8 hours somewhere and nothing happens. There are no guarantees. Spirits aren't performers waiting in the dark to put on a show for the living. If they feel comfortable with you, or if there's some kind of connection, they may choose to make themselves known. But it has to be on their terms too. Wherever you go, keep a positive mindset. Be polite. Be respectful. You'd be surprised how much simple things like saying please and thank you can change the feeling in a place. When I first started, I found a few local locations within about an hour of where I lived, and I went with my cousin Mara. We did that a handful of times, and little by little, we started meeting location owners and other people in the paranormal field. Eventually, we made friends and found a team to investigate with. Now, honestly, they feel like a second family to me. I'm incredibly grateful for what this path has brought into my life, and that's not even counting the experiences themselves. Some of them have stayed with me in a way I can't fully explain. A lot of location owners are wonderful people. They usually love the buildings they care for, and many of them are happy to sit and talk with you about the history. Some might even offer times when you can come back for a quieter, more private experience. I volunteered at a couple of places, just helping clean, move boxes, sweep floors, that kind of thing. And funny enough, I've had experiences during the day when I wasn't even trying. I think maybe the spirits just got used to me being there and decided to say hello. One more important thing. Set your boundaries clearly before and after every investigation. Introduce yourself. Say why you're there. Let them know what you are and are not comfortable with. For example, if you don't want to be touched, say that firmly. If you're okay with communication but not physical contact, say that too. And when you're finished, thank them. Then make it clear that nothing is allowed to follow you home. Whatever is there needs to stay there. I really hope something in this helps you as you start your own journey. Go slowly. Stay respectful. Keep your feet on the ground, even when your mind is reaching into the unknown. I have 2 stories, and I still think about both of them more often than I probably admit out loud. The first one is about my ex-husband, whose name was Caleb. His father was never really in the picture, so he was mostly raised by his mother and by his grandfather, Franklin. And Franklin was not just some distant grandparent who showed up on holidays. He was Caleb's father figure in every way that mattered. If anyone had asked Caleb who had helped raise him, he would have said Franklin without even thinking twice. Franklin was one of those old school men from a quiet little town in Vermont. The kind of man who walked everywhere, knew everybody, and had probably waved at half the town before breakfast. Back when he was younger, he had served with the local fire department, and people really respected him. He was steady, familiar, a part of the town's bones, really. At the time, Caleb and I were living in the upstairs apartment of a 2-story duplex. Some close friends of ours lived downstairs. That detail matters because the smoke detectors in the building were hardwired, so if one apartment's alarms went off, both apartments usually heard it. We had never had any real problems with them before, except the occasional burnt toast situation or someone getting ambitious with dinner. About a year after Caleb and I got married, Franklin passed away. The morning of his wake, around 3 in the morning, Caleb and I were jolted awake by the fire alarms going off. We barely had enough time to sit up, look around the room, and try to understand what was happening before the alarms suddenly stopped. At first, we figured our downstairs neighbors had probably burned something. That was not exactly unheard of. So we laid back down and tried to go back to sleep. Then, maybe 5 minutes later, the alarms went off again. This time, we got up. We checked the apartment. We looked for smoke. We checked on the cat too, because if it had been carbon monoxide, I knew smaller animals could show signs before people did. Everything seemed fine. I went down the stairs and listened near our neighbor's door to see if their alarms were going off too. They weren't. That was strange. Really strange. Then, just like before, the alarms stopped on their own. We cracked a window just to be safe, went back upstairs, and got into bed again. Still uneasy, but tired enough to hope it was over. 5 minutes later, the alarms started screaming again. And I don't know what came over me, but I sat up and shouted, "Enough, Franklin!" The alarms stopped immediately. Not faded, not slowed down. Stopped. We lived in that apartment for another few years after that, and those smoke alarms never went off like that again. Caleb and I always liked to believe that was Franklin saying goodbye in the only way that made sense for him. A fireman, one last time, making sure we knew he was there. The second story happened after Caleb and I decided to divorce. Not long after that, I signed up for an EMT course that my sister was teaching. My sister is one of those people everybody loves, and I don't say that bitterly at all, because I adore her too. She joined the military at 16 with our parents' permission, served in Iraq, and even received a governor's award for work she did helping civilians get access to medical care. After she came home, she became an EMT, then worked her way up to critical care paramedic, which is basically a doctor on wheels without the operating room. Eventually, she was asked to take over as chief of a small-town rescue squad that was close to shutting down. A few years later, they were thriving. And somehow, through all of that, she was raising 2 kids and finishing nursing school with high honors. So yes, everyone's favorite. She needed more people to fill the EMT class, and I needed another source of income because I was suddenly trying to manage life as a single mom on one income. I had no real medical background, aside from a CPR class back in middle school. My sister was the medical person in our family. My dad had some basic first responder knowledge, but that was about it. And my dad is important to this story too. He and I were not close. I spent years in foster care, and for a long stretch of that, we had no contact at all. Later on, he actually lived with Caleb and me for a while, which became one of the reasons my marriage started to fall apart. My dad was not easy to live with. He smoked constantly, rarely showered, and used that old classic Old Spice to try to cover everything up. Eventually, we got him into senior housing, but while he lived with us, it caused damage in my marriage that we just never really repaired. So while I was taking this EMT class, I was juggling a full-time job, an hour commute each way, single motherhood, and a brain that felt like it was running on candlelight. I paid attention during class, but I fell behind on the textbook reading. I could understand the material when it was taught to me, but tests were a whole different beast. I've always had anxiety around exams, and the NREMT certification exam felt terrifying. Very official, very strict, very much like walking into a room where the pencils have authority. Then, in August of that year, my dad died. It hit me harder than I expected. Grief is strange that way. Even when the relationship is complicated, the loss still lands. I had trouble focusing on work, on the EMT class, on everything. I did manage to pass the class, and I passed the practical exam where you have to show that you know how to handle emergency scenarios. But the written NREMT exam was still waiting for me, and I kept putting it off. I was convinced I would fail. I hadn't read enough. My head was foggy, and worst of all, I thought failing would embarrass my sister after everything she had done to help me. So I delayed it. And delayed it. Finally, in November, my sister told me I needed to take the test. Everything about that day felt like a warning not to go. It was late November in Vermont, cold and snowy, and I had to drive about 2 hours to a licensed testing center. You had to show ID. You couldn't bring anything in with you. You were recorded the whole time. And you absolutely could not be late. About an hour into the drive, I hit a road closure because of an accident. My anxiety spiked instantly. I turned around and took a dirt back road, but it had snowed the night before, and I was rushing. I was driving too fast for the conditions, and I didn't know the road well. I took one corner way too quickly and nearly lost control of the Jeep. Somehow, I corrected it. After that, I slowed down and drove like someone who had finally received the message. I made it to the testing center on time, but barely. The test was awful. With that exam, if it shuts off around 60 questions, you either did extremely well or extremely badly. If it drags on close to 150 questions, that usually means you struggled. Mine stopped around 120, which told me absolutely nothing. So I walked out with no idea whether I had passed or failed. Then I had to drive 2 hours home through the cold, carrying that uncertainty like a stone in my chest. The windows were rolled up. The radio was low. I was completely lost in my own thoughts, already imagining how I was going to tell my sister I had failed. And then it hit me. Cigarette smoke, body odor, and that unmistakable old-school Old Spice. It was my dad. There was no doubt in my mind. No other explanation made sense. The smell was too specific, too familiar, too him, and somehow I knew he was there with me. About 2 hours after I got home, I found out I had passed my NREMT exam. I've been a certified EMT for 4 years now. I went on to help my sister rebuild that rescue squad into something incredible, and not long ago, it was named Vermont Ambulance Service of the Year. I still think that smell in the car was my dad coming back for just a moment. Maybe to tell me I had done well. Maybe to tell me he was proud. And honestly, after everything, I really needed that. I'll be honest with you. If you're hoping everything in this universe is going to line up perfectly with reason and logic, you may end up disappointed over and over again. After more than 5 decades of living, I've learned that not everything can be neatly explained. And honestly, I don't even wear myself out trying to make sense of most things anymore. For me personally, things actually make less sense without God. I'm not saying that to push my beliefs on anyone. I'm just speaking from where I stand. I have a hard time looking at the universe and believing it all just happened by accident. The idea that everything began with some massive explosion, and then somehow planets, stars, life, oceans, animals, and human beings all came together by chance just doesn't sit right with me. Especially when I think about the human body. Every second of every day, there are countless things happening inside us without us even telling them to happen. Our hearts beat, our lungs breathe, our cells repair, our brains process. Even when we're sick, the body keeps fighting, keeps adjusting, keeps trying to keep us alive. That feels far too intricate to be random, at least to me. So the closest I come to finding meaning and logic behind our existence is the belief in a divine creator. And then there are all the stories people have told throughout history. Stories about paranormal experiences, near-death experiences, ghosts, UFOs, cryptids, past life memories, and things that seem to reach beyond what we usually call normal. I'm not talking about people who are just making wild claims for attention. I'm talking about ordinary, credible people. People with families, jobs, reputations, and nothing obvious to gain by speaking up. A few weeks ago, I watched a video about researchers who took years' worth of reported cryptid sightings and ran the data through AI. I can't remember whether it focused only on Bigfoot or included other cryptids too, but I think it may have covered several kinds of sightings. The idea was to see if patterns appeared. Maybe the data would expose the whole thing as nonsense. Maybe it would show that most of the reports came from unreliable sources. But according to what I watched, that isn't what happened. The AI didn't come back and say, "Yes, Bigfoot is real," or anything that dramatic. But it did suggest that something unusual was going on. The reports weren't as random as people might expect. One of the strongest patterns had to do with the people reporting these encounters. They weren't mostly unstable or unreliable. In fact, many of them seemed to be respectable, everyday people from all kinds of backgrounds. Different races, different cultures, different religions, different walks of life. Another pattern had to do with timing and location. A lot of these encounters seemed to happen around twilight, either near sunrise or sunset. And many of them happened near water, like rivers, lakes, creeks, or wooded areas close to shorelines. That caught my attention. And when it comes to Bigfoot in particular, there are so many reports that describe something almost paranormal. People say they saw it clearly, then suddenly it was gone. Not just hidden behind a tree, but gone in a way that didn't feel natural. I've heard people describe it almost like the creature stepped out of reality for a moment. I sometimes think of it as hiding in plain sight, or hiding in the light. Maybe these beings, whatever they are, aren't fully part of our physical world. Maybe they can move in and out of whatever dimension we live in. Maybe they can even choose who sees them and who doesn't. That may sound strange, but honestly, it reminds me of UFO and alien encounters too. A lot of paranormal experiences share similar threads, but they still have enough personal detail to feel individual and real. And to me, it's hard to believe that millions of people across the world, across centuries, are all lying or all mistaken. Some people talk about leaving their bodies during near-death experiences. Some remember past lives with details that can later be checked. Some see ghosts. Some encounter strange creatures. Some experience UFOs or missing time. And then there are my own experiences. I've had a near-death experience myself, along with a few things connected to hauntings that I still can't explain away. So no, I don't believe everything in life fits neatly into a little box of logic. Some things don't. Some things seem to exist at the edge of what we understand. And after all these years, I've made peace with that. I want to tell you this as honestly as I can, because I've experienced a lot of what you're describing. Not always all at once, and not always in the same way, but enough that I understand that feeling of wondering whether something unseen is pressing into your life. Back then, I was pregnant and genuinely happy. My husband, Mark, was a good man, and we were excited about becoming parents. But the house we were living in needed too much work. It just didn't feel like the kind of place where we could bring a baby home and still manage everything else. So we moved. We found a pleasant-looking house in a town we'd lived in before when we were newly married. At first, everything seemed fine. But after about 2 months, I started feeling it. That strange sense that someone else was there. Sometimes it didn't even feel like one presence. It felt like a crowd of people I couldn't see. One afternoon, I was sitting in bed reading. My cat was curled up beside me, completely asleep. Suddenly, the side of the bed I was on lifted into the air, maybe 4 or 5 inches, and then dropped hard. My cat woke up from it immediately. That was the thing that stayed with me. I knew I hadn't imagined it. After that, I started seeing shadowy figures around the house. Not just inside either. I would see them around the neighborhood too. Around that same time, a young couple moved in next door. I knew the young woman's father a little, and he had been so pleased about his new son-in-law. He had known him for years and spoke very warmly about him. The couple seemed happy at first. Then the young woman became pregnant, and they were thrilled. But soon after, the fighting began. The husband started drinking heavily. After the baby was born, she moved out. From then on, the police were constantly at the house because of his drunken outbursts. Eventually, the place sat empty for a long while. On the other side of us, another young family moved in. Before long, there was constant domestic violence there too, bad enough that the police had to keep coming. Then there was a house a couple of doors down. When we first moved into the neighborhood, the owner had recently died from cancer. The house was empty for a while, and then a very nice family moved in. Not long after, the mother suddenly developed cancer and passed away. That family left. Another family moved in after them. They had a little boy, maybe 3 or 4 years old, and I know this sounds awful to say, but there was something deeply wrong in his eyes. He had this coldness about him that frightened me. Nobody else seemed to notice it, but he seemed to know that I did. He was especially unpleasant toward me, though I was never rude or unkind to him. I just tried to keep my distance. One night, I was walking my dog when I saw a very tall shadow figure move toward that house. It didn't open a door, it just passed straight through the wall. The feeling coming from it was horrible. Not just dark, but full of hatred. It felt like it hated people. After that, the father in that house became verbally abusive to his wife in front of everyone. One day, the mother came over terrified and asked my husband for help. She said the ceiling fans in her house had turned on by themselves and were spinning so violently she thought they were going to tear out of the ceiling. My husband couldn't fix it, so the only thing he could do was shut off the electricity. Eventually, that family moved in the middle of the school year. They left furniture behind and only took clothes and small personal things. When the mother came to say goodbye, I noticed the little boy seemed different. He looked normal again, not cold or cruel like before. But he was physically very sick. I don't know everything that happened to them after that, but I heard they settled somewhere far away, on the other side of the country. I hope they found peace. Their children would probably be college age by now. My own daughter grew up seeing shadow figures in that house, and after years of being surrounded by so much violence and heaviness, we finally sold it. An Indian family bought it, and since we didn't move too far away, we've seen them from time to time. They seem very happy there, which honestly brings me some comfort. That's why I do believe blessings can help, in whatever way your culture or religion understands them. I have Indian friends, and one of them works very intentionally to keep her home peaceful and blessed. She is Hindu, very devoted, and active in her temple. I'm Christian, so I pray over my home. I've also used salt while praying. In that old house, I don't think I could keep the shadow beings away permanently, but I could create long stretches of peace. The house I live in now is much calmer. I don't see shadow figures here. Once in a while, it feels like something passes through, but it never stays. Still, there are strange things. The house itself is well built and well maintained, but things break in ways that don't make sense even to contractors. Strong materials that should have lasted have disintegrated. Appliances, small hardware, door mechanisms, things like that have just fallen apart from the inside. My husband was fairly well, and then about 3 years ago his health suddenly declined badly. He could have taken better care of himself, yes, but many people take worse care of themselves and don't become that sick so quickly. He passed away. I've also had pets who seemed perfectly fine suddenly die. 2 cats dropped dead unexpectedly, and another became ill very fast and died. Each time it was said to be heart failure. In the last 5 years, all of my husband's aunts and uncles, both of his parents, and my father have died. And it hasn't only been me. One friend's husband suddenly lost his sanity. He had seemed fine, and then something in him just snapped. We're still hoping he recovers. Another friend had a stable, comfortable life, and within 2 years lost his job, his health, and his home. I thought my luck had been bad, but what happened to him was catastrophic and so fast. Most people I know are struggling with something serious now, even people who seemed steady before. I do pray a Christian prayer that someone once shared online, but I won't repeat it here because I don't know your religion, and I want to be respectful. I also believe in science and logic. I really do. It's possible that some of what people experience comes from psychological strain, grief, stress, or exhaustion. I explored that seriously in my own life. After I reported seeing things, doctors treated it as hallucinations, and I was treated for postnatal depression and postnatal psychosis. I made sure to check whether I was mentally well. So I would say this gently. Always rule out ordinary causes first. Health, stress, sleep, environment, carbon monoxide, grief, trauma, anything that could explain what's happening. Start there. And only after that, if things still don't make sense, then consider the possibility that something else may be going on. Everything I've told you could be explained away as people collapsing under the strain of modern life. Maybe that's all it was. But I lived through it. And I know how it felt. There was one rainy night that Lyra never forgot. She had gone back to her family's old vacation house in the province, a place no one had really stayed in for years, not since her grandmother passed away almost 6 years earlier. The house still stood there, quiet and stiff, but it felt less like a home and more like something that had been holding its breath. Lyra carried her bags up to the second floor and chose the room that used to belong to her grandmother. It was clean, but the air inside felt heavy. Old photographs covered the walls, mostly pictures of stars, moons, and planets. Her grandmother had always loved the sky. Across the room was a wide window facing the dark clouds outside. As Lyra unpacked, she let out a tired breath. "Why did I have to stay in this room?" she whispered to herself. After she finished arranging her things, she lay down on the bed. Rain hammered against the roof, steady and restless. The wind slipped through the cracks of the old house, making soft, hollow sounds that almost felt like breathing. Then, without warning, the power went out. Lyra froze. She stayed still in the darkness, telling herself it was nothing. Just the rain, just the storm, just an old house making old house noises. Then something flickered near the window. At first, she thought it might have been a light from outside, maybe a passing vehicle, maybe a lamp from the road. But there was no road close enough to that side of the house. The flicker came again. This time, she saw it clearly. A small hand appeared at the edge of the window. It was pale, too pale. The fingers were thin and wet, pressing gently against the glass. Lyra sat up slowly, her heart beating hard in her chest. Then another hand appeared, then another. One by one, more pale hands slid over the window, brushing the glass as if they were searching for a way in. Lyra wanted to scream, but her voice stayed trapped in her throat. She knew that room was on the second floor. There was no balcony outside, no ledge wide enough for anyone to stand on, no ladder, no tree, nothing. And yet the hands were there. Then the window opened by itself. A cold gust of air rushed into the room, carrying the smell of rain, wet leaves, and something old. Something buried. Then a soft voice whispered from outside. "I've been looking for you. I've been looking for you, my child." Lyra turned toward the window, and there, hanging in the darkness outside, was her grandmother's face. But it was not the face Lyra remembered. The eyes were empty, dull, and clouded. The mouth stretched into a slow, heavy smile. Her hands reached forward like tangled roots, desperate to hold on to something. "Grandma?" Lyra cried. She jumped from the bed and ran toward the door, but before she could reach it, something grabbed her ankle. A hand. Cold, wet, tight. It felt soaked with rain and tears. Lyra fell hard to the floor. She kicked and clawed at the wooden boards, but the hand dragged her backward, inch by inch, toward the open window. The voice came again, closer now. "You can't leave. You promised you would stay with me." Lyra screamed. Then suddenly, everything stopped. The hands vanished. The face disappeared. The lights came back on. The window was shut, locked, and still, as if nothing had happened. But near the window, on the wooden floor, were small handprints. Wet, pale handprints. No matter how hard Lyra scrubbed them, they would not fade. The next morning, she packed her things and said she was leaving right away. She did not explain much. She just wanted out of that house. But as she walked down the path toward the gate, something made her look back. Upstairs, in her grandmother's old room, she saw a face pressed against the window. It was her own, smiling, hanging outside the glass, with both hands pressed flat against it. I think I understand what you mean. In a way, I feel like I've had similar experiences, though maybe you're a little more sensitive to it than I am. The first thing I remember happened when I was very young, probably around 3 years old. My older sister, Eliza, and I shared a room, and we had bunk beds. She slept on the top bunk, and I slept on the bottom one. One night, something woke me up. I don't remember hearing a crash or anything like that. I just remember suddenly being awake and standing beside my bed. Then I heard a whisper. It was close, but I couldn't see anyone. It kept saying, "Go, go, go, go." Somehow I knew exactly what it meant. I knew I was supposed to leave the room and go to my parents' bedroom. So I did. I climbed into bed beside my dad, who was still asleep, and curled up next to him. Only a few minutes later, there was this horrible noise from our room. My sister's top bunk had collapsed down onto my bed, right where I had been sleeping. My parents and I ran in, and there was Eliza sitting up in the broken bunk, crying her little heart out. Thankfully, she wasn't hurt. She was just terrified. I remember talking with her about it when we were kids, but now, all these years later, she doesn't remember it at all. I do, though. I remember it very clearly. Since then, I've had plenty of other experiences. Some were just that strange inner knowing that something was about to happen. Other times, I've seen figures or felt presences. I also had repeated encounters with spirits in a house I lived in years ago with my former husband. As for why it happens to you, I honestly think sometimes it runs in families. I don't know anyone in my extended family who openly talks about having experiences like mine, but a lot of relatives on my mother's side were deeply religious. So it's possible some of them did experience things and just kept quiet about it because of what they were taught to believe. And sometimes, I think it simply happens. No neat explanation, no tidy little box to put it in. When you get that creepy feeling, I think it's best to leave if you can, and not give whatever it is too much attention. Sometimes ignoring it seems to help, almost like it assumes you don't notice it and moves on. But once it knows that you know it's there, I'd be firm. You can say it out loud or just say it in your mind, but say it with authority. Tell it to leave you alone. Act like you're in charge of your own space, because you are. I've had moments where I basically told something to get away from me and stop bothering me, and it worked. You can also ask for help from loved ones who have passed, or from whatever guides or protective spirits you believe in. They may be able to help, or maybe not, but I don't think it hurts to ask. Some people also wear black tourmaline for protection, others like rose quartz. You don't have to make a big ritual out of it. You could just keep a stone in your pocket if that feels right to you. Most of the time, spirits don't really bother me. They're just there, passing through in their own way. But when the energy feels wrong, heavy, or threatening, that's when I call for help or make it very clear that I want to be left alone. If you belong to a religion, lean on what brings you comfort there. For some people, that might mean praying to Jesus. For others, it might mean calling on Allah, angels, ancestors, saints, or whatever spiritual protection they trust. In my opinion, the exact words don't matter as much as your intention. If you're too scared to remember a prayer, just focus on the feeling of protection. Push that intention outward. Make it clear that whatever is bothering you is not welcome. I hope this helps you a little. Trust your intuition. Pay attention to how something feels. Some things can be deceptive, so learning discernment takes time and, honestly, a bit of trial and error. Take the advice that feels right to you and leave the rest behind. You'll figure out what works for you. Good luck. I can understand why all of this might leave you feeling shaken. Honestly, I wasn't sure I should step into this conversation at first, mostly because I try to be careful about what energies I open myself up to. But my son, Eli, encouraged me to answer you, so I'm going to try. I'll keep it as brief as I can, though I'll admit right away that I do have a habit of wandering down the long road when a short path would do. First, you asked why these things might be happening to you, especially when you see yourself as an ordinary person. From what I'm picking up, this seems to come through your mother's side of the family. It may have skipped a generation, maybe even two, or maybe the people before you simply chose not to talk about it. Sometimes these things frighten people so much that they would rather pretend nothing is there at all. And please don't underestimate yourself. Some of the most unusual gifts show up in people who think they're completely ordinary. A deeply intuitive person may think everyone senses what they sense. A compassionate person may think their kindness is just common sense. You're still young, and young people, especially children and teens, can be more open, more sensitive, and sometimes more easily influenced by what's around them. There is a chance you may grow out of it as you get older. But if you don't, then I suppose I should say, welcome to the strange little club that can feel both cursed and blessed. A lot of it has to do with sensitivity, awareness, and even the way certain parts of your mind are still developing. You also asked whether you should acknowledge them when something frightening happens, or ignore them completely. My advice is to ignore them as much as you possibly can. Do not feed it with attention. Do not let it pull you into a conversation. And if you can, I would suggest finding someone experienced and grounded, perhaps a reputable spiritual advisor or medium in your area, someone who knows how to handle these things safely. My son just said he has a strong feeling you may have been thinking about using a Ouija board or something similar. Please, do not do that. I cannot stress this enough. Do not invite anything in. Do not open the door wider than it already is. Even if you think they might leave you alone afterward, they almost certainly won't. That sort of thing rarely closes the door. More often, it removes the hinges. You asked about the veil, and that can be a difficult thing to explain. The veil is the divide between realities. In this case, it is the separation between the physical world we live in and what people often call the beyond. I don't believe it is somewhere far away. It is more like the same world, but viewed from another layer of it. Those beings, spirits, entities, whatever word you prefer, are not bound by physical rules in the same way we are. Time, space, and distance do not seem to hold them the way they hold us. Imagine a thin curtain over a window. You can see movement and shapes behind it, but not clearly. That is the closest way I can describe it. And because it is not a physical thing, people experience it differently. Some sense it visually, some emotionally, some through dreams, sounds, or sudden knowing. As for protection, yes, there are things you can try. You might visit a spiritual shop and ask about protective crystals. I've heard good things from people who use them. Black tourmaline is often used for protection against heavier or negative energy. My son feels that for you, it may not be enough on its own. He mentioned amethyst, and then purple chalcedony came to him as well. I want to be clear that we are not crystal experts, but we are interested in them, and those are the ones that came forward while thinking about your situation. You also asked how to know whether something means harm or not. The simplest answer is this: trust your gut. Truly. Your body often knows before your mind catches up. If something feels wrong, heavy, cold, invasive, or like it is trying to push you into doing something, listen to that feeling. Do not accept anything from it. Do not make deals. Do not agree to anything. And if ignoring it is no longer possible, speak clearly and firmly. You can say, "You are not welcome here. You need to leave." Use a calm, commanding voice. Do not plead. Do not bargain. Set the boundary like you mean it. As for how these things can hurt someone, there are different ways. Some harm is emotional or mental. They may stir up painful memories, create fear, or make you feel isolated so you become easier to influence. Physical harm is less common, but it can happen. My son and I have both experienced things we could not easily explain. He has been scratched, grabbed, and even bitten, and I witnessed some of it myself. They can sometimes pull a person into a strange, trance-like state. They can make your thoughts feel cloudy or push old wounds to the surface. But I want you to remember that something has to be unusually strong to do that kind of thing. It is not something I want you lying awake every night expecting. Be cautious, yes, but do not let fear become the house you live in. I know this old lady has gone on longer than intended, but I hope some of this brings you a little clarity. Blessings to you, and please take care of yourself. One more thing before I go. My son mentioned a song to the tune of "You Are My Sunshine," but with different words. Does that mean anything to you? It may be connected to someone else, but I get the feeling it has something to do with your mother or your family. He says it feels like the second verse, the part about crying, was changed when your mother was younger because that part made her uncomfortable. I don't have a huge amount of experience with things like this, but I can tell you what happened to us. It started in the house we later came to call the Hat Man house. One night, my husband saw him standing over our baby's crib, a tall, dark shape with that unmistakable hat. And instead of freezing or pretending he hadn't seen anything, my husband spoke to him. He told him to leave our child alone. Before that night, there had been this awful weight over the whole house. It felt like the air itself had teeth. I had seen the Hat Man before, and honestly, I thought I was losing my mind. My husband and I had been cold with each other for months, arguing over everything. A lot of it came from him thinking I was imagining things, or exaggerating, or falling apart somehow. But the night he saw him too, something shifted. We started paying closer attention to ourselves. When we felt that sudden irritation rising, when one of us was about to snap over nothing, we would stop. We would call a timeout, go outside, and talk. Not argue, talk. We'd ask, where is this really coming from? And is this actually us? And the more directly we communicated, the less it felt like something in that house could pull our strings. After we finally moved out, the older kids began telling us what they had been dealing with. Footsteps when no one was walking, voices, windows opening and closing by themselves. Things they had kept quiet about for years. They hated that house, every single moment of the 3 years we lived there. From the outside, it looked perfectly normal. A nice home in a good neighborhood. The kind of place people would drive by and think, what a lovely family house. But inside, none of us felt safe. Even now, that house still shows up in our darker dreams. Even for my youngest, who was only 2 when we moved. He's 21 now, and somehow that place still found a way to stay with him. It wasn't until later that I learned about saging a home, and about walking through your space with confidence, speaking out loud, firmly banning anything dark or harmful from staying there. You have to mean it. You have to be direct, firm, loud if you need to be. No fear in your voice. It's your home, and you revoke any claim anything hidden thinks it has on being there. I've done that in every place I've lived since the Hat Man house. I would love to say it would have worked there too, but I honestly don't know. What I do know is that every home after I learned about saging and banishing has been free of that kind of darkness. Now, we do have what I jokingly call house gnomes. You know, the little harmless kind of weirdness where a remote disappears, and then later it's sitting right back in the exact place everyone already checked 3 times. That sort of thing. Annoying, yes. Sinister, no. But before I learned about cleansing and banishing, we lived in one more strange house. It was the place we moved into right after the Hat Man house. That one was a short-term rental while we were looking for something permanent. And from the beginning, I felt watched. There was only one corner in the master bathroom that felt truly private. I can't explain why, but the rest of the house felt like it was listening. There was this pressure to be quiet. And I had 4 boys under 12, so quiet was not exactly their natural habitat. But even they tiptoed around in that house. They moved like one loud noise might crack the ceiling open above us. Later, the older kids told me they saw a man walking down the hallway every night. At the time, I remember them all deciding to sleep together in one bedroom and use the other rooms for forts. I was uneasy enough myself that I was relieved they picked the bedroom right across the hall from mine. We were there less than a month. That was when I really started searching for ways to make the supernatural stuff stop. And strangely enough, once I learned about Sage, the landlord suddenly told us we had to leave because the house had sold. At almost the same time, a house became available in the exact neighborhood we had been hoping for. It was only a couple miles away, and the move could happen quickly. I didn't take any chances. The first day I brought boxes over, I saged every corner of that new house. Every cabinet, every closet, the attic, behind doors, under sinks. If there was a shadow big enough to hold a secret, I put smoke through it. That was over 20 years ago. The older kids are grown now, some in their 30s, some in their late 20s, and those houses still give everyone that same cold feeling when they come up in conversation. What I can say is this: in every place I've lived since, I have smudged, saged, and spoken ownership over the home. I have had 0 problems of the negative kind. And yes, I know that when I bring up house gnomes, borrowers, fae, whatever you want to call them, I sound a little off. I know that. But here's the thing. Once the negative presence stopped, odd things still happened. A single item would vanish from a table, then show up a day later in the exact spot where it was supposed to be. Not under a cushion, not in a drawer, right there, right where everyone had already looked. I don't know what that is. I don't know if it's supernatural, cryptid, some strange little trick of the world, or just my own brain misplacing things and then quietly returning them to the scene of the crime. I call them house gnomes because it keeps me from feeling like I'm losing my grip when the disappearing acts happen. But there is a huge difference between that and what was in those houses. The Hat Man house had weight. It had anger. It had fear. It felt like something was feeding off us. The house gnome feeling is different. It's harmless. Confusing, yes. A little irritating, absolutely. But not dark. Not hungry. not watching from the hallway.
You mean the pale ones?
The gray-looking beings? I've seen things like that too. I'm not going to pretend I know exactly what they are, because I don't have solid proof. But I'll tell you honestly, they never felt like ordinary aliens to me. They felt more like something spiritual wearing an alien mask. Something that could slip in and out of this world when it wanted to. The first thing I tell you is this: don't panic. I know that's easier said than done, especially when something is already messing with your dreams. But fear seems to be what they want. When they get into your sleep, the dreams can turn violent, disturbing, and painful. The kind that jolts you awake with your heart pounding. And from what I've experienced, that fear seems to feed them somehow. Another thing I noticed is that they seem to hate the name of Jesus. They don't respond well to prayer, scripture, or anything holy. That's one reason I started wondering if these things are actually demons pretending to be something else. So here's what I'd suggest. Try to memorize a few prayers if you can. The Lord's Prayer, the St. Michael Prayer, and the Hail Mary. Keep them close in your mind so you can say them even when you're scared. And if you see those beings again, speak firmly. Rebuke them in the name of Jesus Christ. Renounce them. Reject them. Tell them they have no permission to be near you, your home, your mind, or your dreams. If they keep bothering you, especially through nightmares, say the St. Michael Prayer. I know that might sound intense, but I'm telling you, it helped me. St. Michael is powerful. And if you ever sense him or see him, don't be afraid. His presence can feel huge, but not in the same way those things feel huge. It feels protective. My feeling is that if they keep coming after someone, it may be because that person has a strong energy or spirit, and these things are trying to drain it. They act terrifying, but honestly, I think they're weak. They scare people because fear is all they know how to use. Without that fear, they don't seem to have much power. If things get worse, call a priest. Get holy water. Bless your home. Look up traditional house blessings and pray through each room. I'd also suggest holy salt if you can get it. I went through something similar a while back. My name's Marcella, and I'm not even Catholic, but Catholic prayers were what helped me fight back. When I started saying scripture out loud and praying with real conviction, those things reacted fast. They hated it. So no, I don't think you're making it up. I believe you're seeing something real, even if we don't fully understand what it is. I have theories, plenty of them, but I can't claim I have proof. What I can tell you is that prayer helped. Holy water helped. Holy salt helped. And when it got really bad, I played worship music in the house, anything that praised God, and let it run for hours. And if nothing else works, pray. Pray to Jesus. Whatever those things are, they really do not like him. And please, let me know what happens. I want to know if other people are experiencing this too, and whether the same things that helped me can help them fight it off. I want to tell you about the most frightening experience I've ever had online. It wasn't paranormal. There were no ghosts, no shadows moving in the corner, nothing like that. But honestly, it was more disturbing than any horror story I've ever heard. It started one night when I couldn't sleep. I was scrolling through this app called Friendly Shoulder, where people usually post about their problems, their loneliness, or whatever they need to get off their chest. That night, I saw a post from a user named @Chickadaloos. It was simple, something like, "I'm bored. Does anyone want to talk in private? So I messaged her and asked what kinds of things she liked talking about, mostly just to find a normal topic and avoid awkward silence. She mentioned a few things, but one of them was dinosaurs. And I love dinosaurs, so that was it. We spent almost the whole night talking about them. Favorite species, weird facts, fossils, all of that. The only personal thing she told me was that she was from Peru, but that she was living in Brazil with her husband. Then she disappeared. For about 2 weeks, there was nothing. No replies, no sign of her. Then one day, she sent me a message that made my stomach drop. She said there were days when she couldn't talk because her husband didn't like her using the phone. According to her, he only let her have it when she behaved well, and even then, mostly just to play games. She also said she had to be careful because if he found out she was talking to other people, he would hit her. I remember answering something like, "That's a horrible relationship. Your husband sounds toxic. And besides, we're literally just talking about dinosaurs." But she replied, "Those are his rules. I have to obey him." After that, she vanished again. 3 days later, she messaged me asking for my WhatsApp. I gave it to her, and not long after, she video called me. And that's when everything changed. The person on the call was not an adult woman. It was clearly a little boy. He was wearing a wig, and his lips were painted. His face looked bruised. He had marks on him, like he had been beaten. Before I could even find the right words, he started crying. He told me he had been orphaned and had been living on the streets. Then, according to him, some man had offered to take him in, but only if he married him and changed himself into a girl. He said that was the condition for having a roof over his head. I froze. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do fast enough. Then I heard a man's voice shouting in the background. The boy panicked and ended the call. And that was the last time I ever saw him. After that, every account disappeared. His WhatsApp was gone. His profile on Friendly Shoulder was gone. Everything was erased, like someone had wiped him off the internet. I spent weeks trying to find him again. I kept posting about what happened on the app, hoping someone might recognize the story or know who he was. I posted it so many times that the app eventually banned me for spam. Before that happened, a few users told me they thought they knew who I was talking about. Some said they had also noticed that the way she wrote sounded strangely childish, even though the account claimed to belong to an adult woman. I still think about him. I think that call was his way of asking for help. Maybe the only way he knew how. Because where does a child like that go? A child who might not be in school, who is living in another country, who may not speak the language well, and who probably doesn't trust the police. I know the obvious answer should have been to call the authorities, but in that moment, everything happened so quickly, and from his side, I think he was terrified. That experience has stayed with me more than anything else I've ever seen online. Not because it was supernatural, because it was real. I was 17 when this happened, and even now, years later, it still drifts back into my mind more often than I'd like to admit. My family was living in this old farmhouse from the late 1800s. It had that creaky, settled-in feeling old houses have, where every floorboard seems to know more than it's telling. But the strangest thing about it was that the house felt like two completely different places stitched together. Our side looked original. Old trim, older windows, the kind of rooms that felt like they had been standing there forever. But the other half, where our landlord lived, looked totally different. It had this very 1970s feel to it. At the time, I didn't think much of it. I figured people just had different taste. Then the dreams started. For months after we moved in, I kept having these dreams that felt way too real. Some of them were through my own eyes. Some felt like I was floating outside the scene, watching it happen. And sometimes, I was seeing everything through someone else's eyes. It was always a woman. She wore a pale blue dress that looked like something from the 1960s, and she was always crying. She would move through the house, searching for something. Desperate, heartbroken, but she never found whatever it was before I woke up. Eventually, I told my mom about it, and the look on her face changed immediately. She told me she had been having dreams too, only in hers, it wasn't the woman she saw. It was a baby she heard. She said she could hear it crying somewhere in the house, and in the dream, she would run from room to room trying to find it. She'd be panicked, calling out, searching everywhere, but she never found the baby. That alone unsettled me. But what happened next is what I still can't explain. One afternoon, I came home from school exhausted and decided to take a nap on the couch before starting homework. I fell asleep, and the dream began again. Only this time, the woman wasn't wandering through the house. She was standing over me, watching me sleep. In the dream, I pushed myself up a little and asked her, "Who are you?" She didn't answer. She just stepped closer and reached out her hand, like she wanted to help me up. I thought maybe she wanted me to follow her, maybe to show me something, maybe to explain who she was. So I took her hand. And it burned. I mean, it genuinely felt like I had grabbed a piece of metal straight out of a fire. The pain was so sharp and sudden that I woke up instantly. When I looked down, my hand was bright red. Not just flushed either. There was a mark on it, almost perfectly shaped like where her fingers had touched mine. I was sitting there staring at it, completely stunned, when my mom came home from work. She walked in, saw my face, and said, "Lena, you look like you've seen a ghost. Are you okay?" And in that moment, I suddenly knew. I don't know how to explain it, but I knew with complete certainty. I told her, "The woman from my dreams died in a fire, here, on the other side of the house, and the baby died too. She's been looking for her baby." My mom went still. Then she sat down very slowly and said, "I know." That was when she told me she had started looking into the history of the house after we realized we were both dreaming about something connected. She had found out there had been a terrible fire in the 1960s. Half the house burned, and a woman and her 6-month-old baby died in it. Afterward, that side of the house was rebuilt to match the outside, but the inside was completely different. That was why our landlord's half looked like it belonged to another time. Because it did. I never saw the woman again after that. No more dreams, no more crying, no more searching. I've always hoped that maybe she just needed someone to know what happened to her. Maybe once we understood, she didn't have to keep wandering through that house anymore. It was the strangest, most frightening thing I've ever experienced. And even though almost 15 years have passed, I can still remember that red mark on my hand like it happened yesterday. I'm happy to tell it. This happened when I was 15, sometime around 1992, maybe 1993. I was living in Southern California then, and every weekend my dad would drive us out from Orange County to Palm Desert because my parents had a place there. They loved golfing, so that was the routine. Every single weekend. And honestly, when you're 15, being dragged out to the desert every weekend feels like punishment with better scenery. My dad usually picked me up after school, somewhere around 3:30 or 4 in the afternoon. Depending on traffic and whether we stopped for food, we'd normally get to the house around 7, maybe 7:30 at the latest. But that night, we didn't arrive until almost 10. I remember we had finally gotten past the worst of the traffic, and were driving through this quieter, hilly stretch of road. It felt remote, the kind of place where the world starts to thin out a little. I was staring out the window, thinking about my friends and wondering what they were doing that weekend without me. That's when I noticed a bright light in the sky. At first, I wasn't really alarmed. I was just sort of watching it while my mind wandered. But after a while, I snapped out of my thoughts and really looked at it. I remember thinking, what is that? I asked my dad, and he said it was probably a planet. That sounded reasonable enough, so I let it go for a bit. But even while I went back to daydreaming, my eyes kept returning to that light. Eventually, we came out of the hills and reached the higher desert area where the wind turbines are. By then, both of us were watching it because it seemed bigger and closer. My dad started talking quickly, saying it was probably landing lights from a small plane since there was a little airport somewhere nearby. And for a moment, that made sense too. Then we passed the wind farm, and suddenly we were on this dark, empty stretch of road. I don't remember seeing any other cars, just black sky, black road, and this light ahead of us. It kept getting larger until it was right in front of us, huge and blazing, almost like the moon had dropped down to eye level. I couldn't make out a craft or any kind of shape behind it because it was so intensely bright. The contrast of that light against the empty dark was honestly terrifying. I remember saying, "Dad, I really don't think those are airplane landing lights." And this is the part that still feels strange to say out loud, but I had the strongest feeling that whatever it was could hear me. Not just my voice either, my thoughts too. It felt like it reacted the second I realized it wasn't what my dad was trying to explain it away as. The light started pulsing. I had this eerie impression that I had noticed it, and it knew I had noticed it, like it had been caught. Then it went completely dark. Gone. Just gone. It felt like only a few seconds passed. Then the light came back on, brighter than before. It rose up from where it had been, hovered for a moment, and then shot straight up into the sky. It vanished faster than anything I've ever seen. Faster than lightning. Right after that, I suddenly had to pee so badly it almost hurt. It was weird because I hadn't needed to go at all before, and then all at once, it felt like I'd been holding it forever. I looked at the clock to see how much longer we had, and it was around 9:30. That confused me, but not in a clear, logical way. I just remember feeling foggy about it, like my brain didn't want to grab onto the thought too tightly. I recognized some landmarks and knew we were only about 30 minutes from the house, so I mostly focused on just making it there. When we pulled up, my stepmom was outside waiting for us. She was furious, which was completely unlike her. She was usually calm, polished, very composed. But that night she was visibly shaken, asking where we had been and why we were so late. I barely slowed down because I was rushing inside to use the bathroom, but as I passed her, I called back, "Dad and I saw a UFO." And the strange thing is, I hadn't even thought to call it that until the words came out of my mouth. So that's my missing time story. There was another experience years later, during the week I found out I was pregnant with my daughter, but that one belongs to another night. I should probably start by saying the house wasn't some ancient, falling apart place with creaky floorboards and ivy crawling up the walls. It was just a normal terraced house, with neighbors pressed up on both sides of us. From the outside, there was nothing strange about it at all. But upstairs, right at the back of the house, at the very end of the hall, there was this one room. That room was mine when I was growing up, and I hated it. I mean, really hated it. I could never explain why properly, especially as a kid, but being in there always felt wrong. Heavy almost, like the room was waiting for you to notice something. When I was little, I had bunk beds, and I always slept on the top one because, obviously, that was the cool place to sleep. But I used to have these awful dreams about a figure standing at the end of the bed, just watching me. Not doing anything, just standing there. And I used to fall out of that top bunk all the time in my sleep. I'd hit the floor hard enough that my mom could hear it from downstairs, but I wouldn't wake up. Not even a little. It happened so often that it somehow became normal. She'd come upstairs, find me on the floor, pick me up, and put me in the bottom bunk. Years later, me and my mom swapped rooms. I moved into the front bedroom, and she took the back one. Except she didn't really take it. After we swapped, she almost never slept in there. She started sleeping downstairs on the couch instead. If you asked her about it, she'd just say she preferred the couch, but come on. Nobody chooses a couch over a proper bed every night unless something about that bed or that room feels worse. In my new room, my bed was against the wall that joined onto that back bedroom. I don't know if this means anything, but neither of my dogs would sleep on that side of the bed. Not once. If I tried to move them over there, they'd panic, scramble away, and jump straight off. Full-on fear, not just being stubborn. There were a few things that happened to me that I still think about. One night, I was at my desk playing Counter-Strike, completely locked in. My desk faced the wall, and there was nobody else in the house. Out of nowhere, a scrunched-up ball of paper landed right in front of me on the keyboard. Not beside me, not behind me, right there. I just froze, because there was no way for it to have come from anywhere that made sense. Another night, I was walking downstairs to go outside for a cigarette. The light at the top of the stairs never worked, so that part of the house was always dark. I was about halfway down when something shot past my ear and slammed into the wooden floor at the bottom. I couldn't see what it was until I got downstairs and turned the hallway light on. It was a lighter, and it wasn't mine. Mine was in my pocket. Then there was one night when I was washing dishes, and I suddenly burst into tears. Not a little bit either. I mean proper, uncontrollable crying. I'm not really an emotional person, and nothing bad had happened around that time. I wasn't thinking about anything upsetting. It just came out of nowhere. My mom got really worried and kept asking what was wrong, and all I could say was, I don't know. I don't know. That might honestly have scared me more than some of the physical stuff, because it didn't feel like it belonged to me. My mom technically still lives in that house, but she spends almost all her time at her partner's place now. She'd deny anything strange ever happened there, unless she'd had a few drinks. Then little things would slip out. I moved out when I was 18. I'm 26 now, and I haven't slept a single night there since. I barely even go inside. My girlfriend refuses to step foot in the place. She says whenever she's there, she feels violently sick, and she says my mood changes when I'm in the house. The strange thing is, I live in a completely normal house now. No weird noises, no objects flying around, no horrible rooms at the end of the hall. And this might sound messed up, but sometimes I almost miss it. Not the fear exactly, just the feeling that there was something there. Some kind of company, even if it was the kind you really didn't ask for. You can believe me or not. I'm not here to convince anyone. I just know what happened in that house, and after all these years, it still follows me a little. So this happened back in 2008 when I was dating a woman named Marin. She was really into horror movies, ghost stories, the whole strange little midnight carnival of it all. One night, she got it in her head that she wanted to use a Ouija board. I didn't own one, and honestly, I wasn't about to go buy one. I was working as a graphic designer at the time, so I figured, fine, I'll just make one. I designed it myself, printed it at work on this thick, glossy photo paper, and brought it home. Marin put it in a frame, and she already had one of those little planchette things, the piece you rest your fingers on. Since the board was under glass, it slid around pretty easily. Now, before I go any further, I should say this clearly. I don't think of myself as a superstitious person. I'm not someone who automatically jumps to ghosts or demons every time a house creaks. But I've seen enough odd things and heard enough strange things to leave the door open a crack. I don't know what's really out there. Maybe there are overlapping realities. Maybe there are dimensions brushing against ours like pages in a book. Maybe this whole thing is something stranger than we're built to understand. Human eyes can't even see the full spectrum of color, so who knows what else we're missing? And then there are things like the Mandela effect, where huge groups of people remember the same thing differently. Sure, memory is slippery, but millions of people being wrong in the same direction? That always felt a little harder to explain. Anyway, back to that night. We did the usual Ouija board routine. Fingers on the piece, asking questions, watching it drift from letter to letter. I honestly don't remember much of what it spelled out. I wasn't taking it seriously. In fact, I was trying very hard not to take it seriously, because deep down, I didn't really like messing with that kind of thing. When the planchette moved, I just assumed Marin was doing it. Maybe she thought I was doing it. Nothing dramatic happened. No lights flickering, no whispers, no horror movie nonsense. I think she was trying to contact a relative, maybe her grandmother. When we were finished, I told her I didn't want that thing sitting around my apartment. So I took the board out of the frame and threw it away. The next day, I came home from work, opened the closet, and there it was. The board was back in the frame, sitting on the floor. I asked Marin if she had taken it out of the trash, and she said no. At first, I thought she had to be messing with me, but her face changed. She looked genuinely worried, not playful, not guilty, just concerned. So I took it out of the frame again. This time, I walked it all the way out to the dumpsters. I bent the glossy sheet as much as I could, shoved it down into the trash, and left it there. The reason I hadn't crumpled it the first time was because it wasn't regular paper. It was thick photo stock, the kind that doesn't just fold up neatly unless you really mean it. A couple of months later, we found out Marin was pregnant. We decided we needed a bigger place, so I found an apartment across town. We packed everything up over a weekend. Back then, I had a lot of old music gear. I used to play in bands, and even though some health problems later made it hard for me to play like I used to, I never liked getting rid of my instruments and equipment. Most of it was stored in the coat closet. So I opened that closet to start packing, and sitting right there with my music gear was the Ouija board. In the same frame. And the paper was perfect. No bends, no wrinkles, no crease marks, nothing. It looked like it had never been thrown away at all. I just stood there staring at it. Then I called Marin over and showed her. This time, she was scared too. Not pretend scared. Not, this is fun, scared. Actually scared. So we both took it outside together. I smashed the frame into pieces. Then I set the board on fire. We stood there and watched the whole thing burn until there was nothing useful left of it. After that, we threw the broken frame pieces into the dumpster. I also made her get rid of the planchette. We moved a few days later. We never saw the board again. And I still don't have an explanation. A few years after that, when our son was still a toddler, something else happened that I try not to think about too much. One day, he tried to walk straight into the fireplace. We stopped him immediately, obviously, and asked him why he would do something so dangerous. He told us there were children living inside the fireplace. He said they talked to him through the wall. He said they wanted him to come play. I made him promise me, right then and there, that he would never, ever do anything like that again. He's 18 now. Just a few days ago, he got on a bus to visit his girlfriend in another state. I hadn't thought about any of this in years, but after he left, this sudden wave of fear came over me. It was sharp and heavy and out of nowhere. It passed. I'm okay now. But it was strange, really strange, because I hadn't seen anything or read anything that reminded me of that board in a long time. And then, suddenly, there it was again in my mind, clear as glass. I don't know what any of it means. I only know what happened.
I bought a house with my ex-wife not long after we got married.
Funny enough, today would have been our anniversary. Before we moved in, one of the neighbors tried pretty hard to talk us out of buying the place. He told us, in this hushed, dramatic way, that several people had died there. At the time, we just brushed it off. We figured every old rural house probably had a story or two rattling around in the walls, so we signed the papers and moved in. A few years later, I started a new job, and one of my coworkers, Darren, happened to mention that he was related to the family we bought the house from. That's when the real story started to come out. The house had been built in the mid-1960s by a German couple who had fled Europe during World War II. That part made sense, because when we moved in, we found boxes of old German books tucked away in the house, the kind of stuff that felt like it had been waiting quietly in the corners for decades. They had a big family. Their kids had kids of their own, and one of those grandkids was the man who eventually sold the place to us. From what Darren told me, around the early 2000s, the wife was diagnosed with breast cancer. Her husband more or less gave up the rest of his life to care for her. He waited on her, cooked for her, handled her medicine, spent their savings, and stayed by her side through all of it. By the time we bought the house, there was still an old hospital bed in one of the bedrooms. There were cases of medical supplies in closets too. At the time, I didn't know the full story. I just thought it was strange and sad. Apparently, after many years, she became bedridden, and he almost never left the house anymore. He was her full-time caretaker. This next part is mostly family speculation, passed around and softened by time. But one morning he left to run errands. The house was way out in the country, so even something simple, like paying a bill in person, could turn into a long trip. When he came home, he found that his wife had finally lost her fight with cancer. And I guess the grief just swallowed him whole. The way Darren told it, the husband took a bottle of her pain pills, swallowed all of them, laid down beside her, and died next to the woman he had spent years trying to save. I'm not going to pretend that didn't get to me. I was sitting there at work, listening to this story about my own house, and I was genuinely crying. It was awful and beautiful in the saddest possible way. But then the story took a strange turn. For some reason, none of their children wanted anything to do with the house after that. Nobody wanted to clean it out. Nobody wanted to sell it. Nobody even seemed interested in the money. It just kept getting passed from one family member to another, like an unwanted heirloom with too much weight attached to it. Eventually, one of the grandkids asked basically, "If I deal with selling it, can I keep the money?" And everyone agreed, probably just relieved that somebody was finally willing to handle it. So we started cleaning the place out. And that's when they found an unbelievable amount of old German adult material hidden throughout the house. I'm not exactly prudish, and I try not to judge what consenting adults are into, but apparently some of it was disturbing enough that the police got involved. That is about as much detail as I ever wanted or needed to know. There was one more strange thing about that house, and I never told my ex-wife this part. About a year after we moved in, our very old cat passed away. I wanted to bury her somewhere peaceful, so I picked what looked like an old garden plot in the backyard. I started digging and hit bones. Animal bones, as far as I could tell. I didn't want to bury my cat in what felt like another animal's grave, So I covered them back up and picked another spot. More bones. So I tried again. More bones. I must have dug 10 different holes across that yard, and every single time I found more of them. Not just one little patch either. They were spread out over a pretty large area. Eventually, I got too creeped out to keep going, so I carried my cat around to the front yard and buried her beneath a magnolia tree. Thankfully, that spot was bone-free. I can understand what it feels like to be sensitive to things most people don't notice. I don't really talk about it often, because it sounds strange even to me, but there have been times when I felt like I was receiving messages from people who had already passed. Most of the time, they seem to come from people who died suddenly, especially by suicide. My feeling is that they aren't fully settled yet, or maybe there's something they desperately need someone living to hear. The first time it happened, I wasn't looking for it. I didn't invite it in. I was just trying to fall asleep. I remember lying there in the dark, almost drifting off, when this intense sensation came over me. It felt like my whole body was vibrating from the inside. There were these deep, humming sounds in my head, almost like echoes in a tunnel, and flashes of color behind my closed eyes. It reminded me a little of those jolts you get as a child when you're half asleep and suddenly feel like you're falling. Except this was much stronger, much more deliberate. I sat up fast and shook my head, trying to make it stop. For some reason, I felt like I was about to cry, even though I didn't know why. Then it happened again, and again, maybe 4 times in a row. Finally, I gave up on sleeping and went into the living room to watch television for a while, just to feel normal again. About half an hour later, I went back to bed. This time, whatever it was came through softer. It was still there, but gentler, almost like it was approaching from far away. I remember thinking, "All right, what do you need to say? Because clearly you're not going to let me sleep." And then everything changed. The noise stopped. The colors stopped. Suddenly I was a man, tall, thin, completely bare, sitting in the dark at the edge of a high ridge or cliff. I couldn't see what was below me. I only knew it was very far down. I was hugging my knees, rocking back and forth. My teeth were chattering. My breathing was broken from sobbing, but there were no tears left. I got the impression of a short name. At first it flickered in my mind, like Rob or Dan, but it wouldn't settle. Then I stood up. I stretched my arms out, lifted my face, closed my eyes, and stepped forward. The second he stepped off, I wasn't in his body anymore. I was in his mind, and what came through was instant regret. Not a little regret. Not a thought passing by. It was everything. There was this long, terrible moment where he realized he wanted nothing more than to have his feet back on solid ground. He wanted to undo it. He wanted the smallest chance to choose differently. It was shocking how fast everything had changed. 1 second, there was still a choice. The next second, there wasn't. I never felt the impact. I never experienced the actual death. I think that part was missing because he was already gone. Instead, I suddenly saw a woman from above, unlocking her front door after work. It was like I could see through the roof of her house. I couldn't see her face clearly, but I recognized the long hair. I recognized the house, the land around it, the little lane. She was someone I had only met once years before. At the time, my boyfriend and I had rented a small place one summer from his uncle, and this woman lived across the lane. One afternoon, we stopped by with his uncle because they were going to give her an estimate for painting the outside of her house. I remember waving and saying, "Hi, neighbor," just being friendly. While we were standing there talking about paint and supplies, a man came out of the house wearing cycling clothes with a bike over his shoulder. She introduced him as her husband. He kissed her quickly on the cheek and said he was going for a ride. Then he left. That was it. Just a tiny moment. Life went on. Years later, I was helping my boyfriend's uncle plant flowers at another property in a nearby town when he mentioned her name. He said he had recently run into her after not seeing her for years, and they were planning to have coffee. The second he said it, I went completely still. I was right back in that experience again. He had to tap me on the shoulder because I wasn't answering him. I was nervous, but I finally told him what had happened. I told him about the man at the cliff, about the regret, about the message, and about the short name that felt like Rob or Dan. He stared at me for a moment and said, "Like Tom?" And when he said that name, something in my chest settled. I knew. I said, "Yes, just like Tom." Then he reminded me that the man we had met that day, the one with the bicycle, had been named Tom. He told me Tom had taken his own life about a year after that brief meeting. I was stunned. Eventually, his uncle passed the message along to her. The message was that it wasn't her fault, that he had felt lost before he did it, but the regret came immediately. He wanted her to know he could hear her when she spoke to him, and that when she felt lonely, she could talk to him out loud because he was listening. Years later, when I was going through a very hard time myself, I got a phone call one evening from a soft-spoken woman. Her voice was trembling. She simply told me thank you. She said I had no idea how much I had helped her. And then I realized she was crying. This was in the old gold country hills of California, and even now, when I think about it, I don't remember it as something frightening. I remember it as grief trying to find a doorway. And somehow, for a little while, I became that doorway. Anyway, I've always been sensitive to things like this, and I think that's probably why I had so many more experiences than my two half-sisters did. The first house we lived in had what I can only describe as 3 portals. 2 of them felt almost like airport terminals. Spirits, or whatever they were, would move through my room from one closet to the other, and it was like they didn't even notice me. They were just passing through. But the third one was different. That one was in the basement, and it felt like the source of something dark. There was this malevolent presence down there, and it seemed to have smaller, chaotic little trickster-type energies around it. They stirred things up constantly. Things would happen in the house, and my sister was the one who got blamed for most of it, even though I knew it wasn't her. Eventually, my parents sold that house. They built a new one on a piece of the land they kept, not far from the original property. And that house had its own presence. There was an old man there. Every night I would hear him walk into my room. I could feel him sit down on the edge of my bed. I was scared, but at the same time, I wasn't. That probably sounds strange, but it's the only way I know how to explain it. There was fear, yes, but not the kind that told me I was in danger. Looking back now, my instincts tell me he may have been connected to the land somehow. Maybe he had owned it before. Maybe he stayed because he was watching over me. I've wondered if he was protecting me from whatever was still lingering across the yard, back at the first house. This was on the outskirts of St. Louis, where old energy seems to sit quietly in the soil. Historical places are hard for me too. Museums, old buildings, battlefields. Sometimes the residual energy is so thick it feels like walking through weather. And then there's intelligent energy, the kind that knows you're there. That can be overwhelming. Honestly, It's gotten harder for me as I've gotten older. I had what I believe was a demonic attack once while I was on a work trip in North Carolina. That one was rough. I still don't like thinking about it too much. Another time, I was traveling for work and so focused on the job that I didn't even realize where I was. One night, I was driving back to my hotel late, and this crushing sadness came over me. It was heavy, sudden, and deep. Then I looked around and realized I was passing a Civil War battlefield. I hadn't even noticed it before. During the day, the place didn't feel the same, but at night, it was like everything woke up. After that, everywhere I went in that area felt heavy. I think I had accidentally dropped whatever block I usually keep up, and it's become harder and harder for me to hold those blocks in place. Now I live in a suburb outside Kansas City, near where the Oregon, Santa Fe, and California trails all come together. On top of that, we're right in the path of the border war and bleeding Kansas history from the Civil War era. There is so much activity here, and most people have no idea. When we were looking for the house we live in now, every single home we toured had something going on. Full hauntings. Not just a creak here or a strange feeling there. Real activity. Even my husband, who is a skeptic and an engineer, had experiences in 2 of them. That alone told me I wasn't imagining it. Our last house had what I'd call a hungry elemental. That was one of the hardest situations I've dealt with. I had to coax it into letting us leave. It felt like negotiating with something old, stubborn, and not remotely human. The house we bought now had fairly good energy, thankfully. There was someone here at first, someone I called Grandpa, though I don't know who he really was. It took a few months, but eventually he moved on. My sense was that he went to be near someone from his own family. Now, what we mostly have are what I call pass-throughs. The house just seems to sit along a route that certain spirits use. They aren't necessarily here for us. They're just moving through. I try not to engage with them. I don't want them to get comfortable. I don't want them to think this is a place to stay. I do think I need some kind of protection around the property, something that encourages them to walk around instead of through. But I'm nervous about doing it wrong. My fear is that instead of keeping things out, I could accidentally lock something in. I've been touched a few times here. We've also had some poltergeist-type activity, though I honestly think some of that may have come from me during a time when I was in a very bad mental place. I've learned that energy can spill out of people in ways we don't always understand. One of the wildest things happened in the backyard. I was planting flowers, and I was leaning on my shovel while looking at the spot where I planned to put some candy tuft. Out of nowhere, I felt this rush of energy come up behind me. It wasn't wind. It had weight to it. Then I felt a hand press against my lower back and push me to the side. A few seconds later, I felt another presence rush past, and I heard someone yell after the first one. It felt like 2 young men, or maybe boys, running through the yard, one chasing the other. And the thing is, I don't think it was residual. If it had been, it wouldn't have moved me. It wouldn't have cared that I was standing there. But this one pushed me aside, almost like I was in the way. I lost my balance and caught myself on the shovel right before my knee hit the ground. It shook me up. I just stood there afterward, trying to process what had happened. It hasn't happened again, but when I'm out in the garden, I often feel people watching me. Not in a threatening way, more like they approve of what I'm doing, like they're pleased the land is being cared for. I have so many experiences like this. Part of me wants to visit famous haunted places just to see what's really there. But I don't dare. I'm too worried about bringing something home with me. An attachment is not something I want to risk. And honestly, I know I need help protecting this property. Because even though most of what comes through seems to keep moving, there's always the chance that something unpleasant could decide not to pass through at all. It could decide to stay,